Chapter 2209. Among the three, Xiangju was the most eager to obtain the place of creation. This was because Ji Zhuang's place of creation had not been taken away by Zhang Yan, and Wei Ming had already reached an agreement with Zhang Yan to observe the place of creation. This meant that he was currently the only one being targeted, which made him feel a little uneasy. He believed that the reason was not that Zhang Yan was certain that Ji Zhuang was not the spirit of creation, but that he was deliberately trying to divide them in order to prevent them from joining forces. It wasn't impossible for Wei Ming and Ji Zhuang to give in. After all, no one wanted to fight to the death in order to cultivate in peace. If they weren't forced into a desperate situation, they wouldn't want to fight to the death. Moreover, if they were unlucky, everything could be overturned. The risk was not small. Therefore, the only thing they could do was to act as soon as possible. If they did not act, then the two would very likely retreat. Wei Ming pondered for a moment before saying, "Since we've already decided on a plan, let's stick to it. We can first reason with that Taoist Shen Yuan." Ji Zhuang nodded. "Yes, fighting is the last resort. If it is not necessary, there is no need to do this." Xiangju could sense that although Wei Ming and Ji Zhuang did not intend to break their promise, their attitudes were not as firm as before. In his opinion, if they did not initiate a fight and only used words, how could they force Zhang Yan to let go? This was absolutely impossible. But of course, he wouldn't oppose it openly. He said, "I know what you two are thinking, and I think so too. If fellow Shen Yuan is really reasonable, that would be for the best." After the agreement was made, the three withdrew from the divine wills and appeared in front of Bushutian in a flash. Xiangju stepped forward and bowed to Bushutian. "Taoist Shen Yuan, are you here? We have come to discuss something with you. I wonder if you can show yourself?" Zhang Yan was sitting in the Qinghuan Palace. Hearing Xiangju's words, he slowly opened his eyes. Long ago, he had expected that the three of them would most likely end up together. This was actually inevitable, because he undoubtedly occupied the most places with the essence of creation. As long as this person was still thinking about ascending the Grand Tao, then he would definitely have his eyes on this place. When Wei Ming and Xiangju were around, they didn't do this because they didn't have enough power. Now that Ji Zhuang was back, they thought that the three of them were enough to deal with him. Previously, when Ji Zhuang Daoren found the place of creation, he didn't go and expel it. It wasn't because the person was unlikely to be the spirit of creation. In fact, even if there was only a slight possibility, he couldn't let his guard down. The reason why he didn't make a move against that person was because there was only one place of fortune. There was no need for him to rush to chase it away. If he found that person again, it wouldn't be too late to go and greet him then. However, before he could make a move, the three of them came knocking on his door. He spread out his large sleeves and stood up, leaving the Qinghuan Palace. He raised his hand and bowed, saying, "May I know why the three of you are looking for I?" Wei Ming took a step forward and bowed, saying, "Sorry to disturb you, fellow Taoist. We know that you have many places of fortune under your rule. This time, we came looking for you to discuss something with you." Ji Zhuang said, "The places of fortune are where the essence of creation resides, and they naturally have the Grand Tao to rely on. From there, we can see many wonderful principles. However, every time fellow Taoists find this place, they occupy it and treasure it for themselves, unwilling to show it to others. This is really detrimental to cultivation, and it's easy to cause discord among fellow Taoists. Therefore, after discussion with the two of you, we decided to take out the places of fortune in our hands and allow all of us to comprehend them together." At this moment, Xiangju continued, "Fellow Taoist, you also have a place of fortune in your hands. Why don't you open the door as well? This way, not only us, but also other Taoists who return can comprehend the Grand Tao and share the fortune together. Isn't this better than scheming against each other?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "What you want to do has nothing to do with I, and I have no intention of doing such a thing." Xiangju refuted, "How is it unrelated? It's our credit that Taoists are able to find the Grand Tao now. It can be said that all the places of fortune are related to us." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Back then, I won't comment on what you did. However, the birth of the spirit of fortune, the destruction of the essence of creation, and the near collapse of Taoists must have something to do with you. Do you really dare to brag about your credit? Moreover, fellow Taoist Wei Ming's Weili form of sustenance is constantly pressuring Taoists. If it wasn't for I resolving it with my power, Taoist Wei Ming would have long been overturned by the time you returned. Where would you have found the places of fortune then? Wei Ming was speechless. Xiang Ju said coldly, if there is, then there is, and if there isn't, then there isn't. If there was nothing, we wouldn't have come to your sect. No matter how you refute, the places of fortune are all because of us. How could we open the path of the Grand Tao and let you take all the benefits? Wei Ming frowned inwardly. Xiang Ju's tone was so fierce, and his words were so firm. It was obvious that he didn't want to resolve the matter peacefully, but wanted to resort to a fight. The key was that what was originally reasonable had become unreasonable. Zhang Yan said, all the places under I's rule are directly inherited by my sect, and some are found by my own people. However, no matter where they come from, other than fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang's Mirror Lake, the rest of the places have nothing to do with you. It's too easy for you to take it away with just a few words. Ji Zhuang didn't say anything. If he asked for the Mirror Lake now, and Zhang Yan returned it to him, there seemed to be no excuse to stand with the two of them, and it would be meaningless to mention it. Moreover, he came here today to let the other party take out all the places of fortune to share, so he naturally wouldn't lose the big picture because of a small gain. Xiang Ju sneered and said, previously, fellow Taoists suspected that I was the spirit of fortune, and arranged a fight with me. However, I also felt that fellow Taoist couldn't prove himself. If fellow Taoist is the spirit of fortune, wouldn't it be a calamity of fortune for us to occupy these places? Why don't we verify the truth with fellow Taoist? What does fellow Taoist think? Zhang Yan's eyes flickered and he said, oh? Then how do you explain the truth? Wei Ming said, if we can't beat fellow Taoist in terms of power, we will retreat and won't disturb fellow Taoist anymore. If fellow Taoist loses this opportunity, I hope you can open all the doors of the places of fortune for us to observe. Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled. Wei Ming said, fellow Taoist seems to have a different opinion? Zhang Yan said indifferently, I have many places of fortune. If the three of you want to spar, then at least bring something of equal value. Otherwise, there's no point in competing. The three of them looked at each other. If Zhang Yan were to hide in Busu Tian and these places of creation, it would indeed be troublesome to fight against them with pure defense. Unless they could wait for the next Vedanta to come and persuade him to work with them, they would have to wait for a long time. Wei Ming said seriously, fellow Taoist should also know that we don't have anything of equal value in our hands. If fellow Taoist doesn't want to compete in terms of power, then please speak frankly. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, I think that you have something in your hands that can match the places of fortune. Wei Ming was startled and said, but what is it that fellow Taoist is talking about? Zhang Yan said, creation Pauline. He looked at the three of them, if I win against the three of you, then you have to send the creation Pauline in your hands to me. Wei Ming and the other two couldn't help but be surprised. They didn't expect Zhang Yan to make such a request. It must be known that a treasure like creation Pauline, as long as the master was still alive, could be taken back with just a thought. Outsiders couldn't take it away, so even if Zhang Yan asked for it, it would be useless. Zhang Yan naturally didn't want the treasured lotuses of fortune, and he wanted to seize this opportunity to seize the energy of the treasured lotuses. Moreover, if the treasured lotuses were in his hands, then he would be able to deduce even more Tao arts from the damaged jades and seize the authority of the grand Tao of the treasured lotuses of fortune even faster. In fact, as long as he could take the Qi movement, it wouldn't be a big deal even if Pauline was immediately called back. However, he was very clear that these three people, as Vedanta, naturally wanted to save face. If they lost to him in this debate, even if they wanted to take back Pauline, they would have to wait until the next time. Xiang Ju and the other two discussed it and all thought that this condition could be agreed to. Because if they lost, it didn't matter if they had the creation Pauline in their hands or not. Moreover, it was impossible for Zhang Yan to restrain this thing. If he felt something was wrong, it would be good to take it back in time. Wei Ming cupped his hands and said, since fellow Taoists said so, we will use creation Pauline as the object of the challenge. If I lose, I will naturally offer this thing. If I win by a fluke, fellow Taoist must share all the places of fortune under your rule with our fellow Taoists. Zhang Yan nodded and said, all right. Wei Ming then suggested, if we were to fight, using mana against each other and Pauline colliding, it would inevitably shake the silence and cause everything to collapse. Why don't we enter the battle of divine will? In fact, the battle of divine will between Vedanta was not much different from a real battle. Both sides were proficient in the Tao of being and non-being and could use any external means. Once one's body was damaged, it would be reflected on the original body. The biggest advantage here, other than not affecting everything, was that within the divine will, the defeated party could retreat from it at any time and would not be targeted by the opponent. Zhang Yan didn't mind. If they were to fight, there was a possibility that everything would be destroyed, but there was no need to worry about this in the battle of divine will. He could be free and use any means he wanted. After the two sides came to an agreement, their minds joined together and entered the divine will. As for how to deal with Zhang Yan, Xiang Ju, Wei Ming, and Ji Zhuang had obviously discussed it long ago. Once they entered the divine will, they each supported the creation Pauline and used the power of Pauline. It pressed towards where Zhang Yan was. Seeing this, Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, but he stood with his sleeves behind his back. He didn't evade and let the power of Pauline press on him. He didn't move a single step. After his strength path technique improved, it wasn't difficult for him to resist the heavy pressure of Pauline with his own body. The three of them didn't know the changes here, but they weren't surprised that Zhang Yan could resist the pressure of 3 Pauline flowers. They all knew that Zhang Yan had Busu Tian and an unknown number of creation lands behind him. As long as he used the Weili, it wouldn't be difficult for him to fight against Pauline. However, this was also their goal. They first tried to suppress Zhang Yan's means one by one, then make use of the advantage of numbers. This way, it wouldn't be difficult to defeat him. Chapter 22:10. At this moment, Xiang Ju's mind moved, and an invisible force surged around Zhang Yan's body. This force constantly evolved and eroded the Xian Qi around his body. The battle of the virtuous virtues was like a game of chess. This attack was aimed at restraining and probing Zhang Yan's next move. Only then would Ji Zhuang and Wei Ming decide how to act. In a battle between 3 people, the greatest advantage was that they could look out for each other and help each other. If one person lost the opportunity, the other could come up to fill the gap. If one person succeeded, the other could support him from the side. Putting all of one's strength in one go was the most unwise move. Instead, it would allow the opponent to see through everything and give it his all. Zhang Yan still stood motionless, his body surging with Xian Qi, blocking the invisible force outside. But this seemingly simple contact actually dispelled the Tao contained in the invisible force in the blink of an eye. But before he could launch a counterattack, Ji Zhuang made a move first. There was a flash of spiritual splendor, and in an instant, there was a great burst of light. In the divine will, other than the few of them, there was originally nothingness and chaos. But now under the boundless brilliance, it seemed to have been cleansed. The surging Xian Qi outside Zhang Yan's body turned and suddenly turned into a large hand. With just a grab, it completely captured the splendor into the palm. Xiang Ju saw that he did not retreat when facing the two of them, and was somewhat surprised and pleasantly surprised. He had previously thought that when Zhang Yan was surrounded by 3 people, no matter how tyrannical he was, if he did not take out the pearl that he had used against him last time, then he should have chosen to retreat. In this way, their follow-up attacks would be more troublesome, but as long as they took the initiative, there would always be a chance to force him into a corner. Unexpectedly, Zhang Yan chose to take it head-on. This was the most unwise move, but it was extremely beneficial to them. Because in this way, he would have to resolve their attacks one after another without any time to launch a counterattack. Although Zhang Yan seemed to be easily blocking the attacks of the two, in reality, every simple attack of the Vedanta was the manifestation of the wonderful principles of the Great Tao. Therefore, each time, the person being attacked would have to find a way to resolve the Tao. If the deduction was slightly slower, and he could not rely on his own understanding of the Tao to resolve the attack in time, then a huge flaw would be revealed. Under their continuous attacks, the situation would become more and more disadvantageous for him, and his failure would be doomed. However, he did not let his guard down. He did not forget that Zhang Yan still had the good fortune Pauline with him. Even if something went wrong, as long as he used it, he would be able to avoid a dangerous situation. But even if he could avoid it once, he might not be able to avoid it twice. As long as he could force Pauline out, then the Whaley would be able to sense it clearly, and they would be able to find a way to deal with it. At this time, he guided his thoughts. Without waiting for Zhang Yan's big hand made of qi to attack, a gust of wind was generated out of thin air and continued to roll towards Zhang Yan. Wei Ming, on the other hand, was cautious. He stood aside and did not make a move. Although he had not fought with Zhang Yan before, among the three, he was the most afraid of Zhang Yan. He thought that the current two people's joint attack was enough to deal with it for the time being, but Zhang Yan's means should not be so simple. He had not even used the good fortune Pauline and the divine bead from last time, so his real means had not been shown. If there was a change, he could still resolve it or fill in the loopholes. Zhang Yan's big hand of qi suddenly separated and turned into two big hands of qi, easily blocking the attacks of the two people. Although he did not counterattack, it could be seen that he was at ease. Even if Wei Ming intervened at this time, he might still be able to deal with it. Xiang Ju and Ji Zhuang both frowned. They did not expect that Zhang Yan could still be so calm when dealing with the attacks of two people at the same time. This was not a simple matter. It meant that he had to resolve the great path laws manifested by the two people at the same time. Although they did not use their killer moves, he did not use his real skills either. This meant that he had walked further in the Great Path Galaxy than they did, and was closer to the source of the Great Path. Therefore, it was not so difficult for him to resolve their Great Path laws. Perhaps if Wei Ming chose to make a move now, he could break this stalemate. But the two people changed their minds and did not call out to Wei Ming, because if he did not make a move, they could maintain more pressure. This was also good. They were the attacking side. As long as Zhang Yan had no way to threaten them, they could continue like this until the latter revealed a flaw. From the beginning, Zhang Yan did not make any move to retreat. He did have the strength to counterattack. The reason why he did not move was not only to guard against Wei Ming, who had not made a move yet, but also to observe the Tao laws of Xiang Ju and Ji Zhuang. Vedanta each controlled a part of the great Tao. At this stage, everyone had their own Tao path. The Tao of others might not be their own Tao, so there was no need to even use it as a reference. Therefore, the things that they learned from observing would only be incompatible with their own Tao. But this did not mean that one did not need to understand the opponent. In fact, the more familiar one was with the opponent's Tao laws, the easier it would be to deduce and resolve it. He had a hunch that this battle would not be the last battle between him and this generation. There should be more opportunities to fight in the future, so it was better to take this opportunity to try to understand more, unless he could get rid of these three people once and for all. But as long as great virtue Pauline, who was under his control, was still alive, it was impossible to be sent into eternal silence. Moreover, he did not have this intention. The battle between great virtue had not reached the point of life and death. The spirit of creation was the real enemy. Xiang Ju and the others, excluding the possibility that they were borrowed by the spirit of creation, were important forces to fight against this person. If he got rid of this generation, he would be solving the problem for the spirit of creation. Xiang Ju and Ji Zhuang were vaguely aware of Zhang Yan's intention, but it was useless to know. They either took the initiative to break the deadlock, or waited for Zhang Yan to make a mistake. The two looked at each other and communicated telepathically. They thought that with the ability Zhang Yan had shown at the moment, it would not be difficult to deal with the current situation. If this continued, it seemed that there was no way out, so it was better to use some tricks. The two of them made up their minds. They each held a spell, and the aura on their bodies suddenly increased by a level. The invisible wind and the boundless light contained the Tao laws suddenly became much more complex and exquisite. Zhang Yan's eyes sharpened. He knew that the two of them had finally shown their true abilities after seeing that they could not break the situation. At this time, Facing the means of Xiangju and Ji Zhuang, he did not try to decipher the Tao laws this time. Instead, he punched forward. Boom! Whether it was the invisible wind or the boundless golden light, they were all shattered by this punch. Strength Tao techniques were straightforward. There was no need to care about deciphering Tao techniques, killing techniques, or deductions. As long as one's technique couldn't destroy the strength Tao body in one go, then all I had to do was throw a punch. Before the first punch was over, the second punch was already coming. At the same time, a pearl that was enshrouded in immortal energy emerged from the lawless lands. Without any process, it directly hit the two of them on the Weili. Xiangju and Ji Zhuang's expressions changed. They did not expect the situation to change so quickly. Now, they were the ones who had fallen into a passive position. Wei Ming's heart trembled. He felt that this punch also contained an infinite amount of Tao laws. Xiangju had mentioned that Zhang Yan did not have this kind of ability. Although it was unexpected, it was not like he did not take precautions during the discussion. Part of the reason why he did not make a move before was to block this loophole. Thus, he changed his mind and instantly completed the calculation of deciphering the punch. Then he moved the Weili forward to block it. As long as he could block it for a little bit, Wei Ming and Ji Zhuang would be able to catch a breath. Originally, it was best to attack Zhang Yan directly. However, he suspected that Zhang Yan had other tricks up his sleeves. If he ignored his attack, he might end up making a fool out of himself. Zhang Yan's cautiousness had indeed allowed him to avoid a missed opportunity. Other than his body of strength, Zhang Yan also had the protection of his treasured robe. If he saw an opportunity to defeat Ji Zhuang and Xiangju, then he would have ignored their attack and chosen to take the blow directly. Zhang Yan's second punch directly pierced through the Weili of the Land of Fortune. For the body of strength, after a punch, it did not matter what the opponent was facing. There were only two results: breaking or being blocked. With this obstruction, Ji Zhuang and Xiangju immediately recovered. Xiangju took out a horsetail whisk. With a wave, he blocked the Greater One Divine Pearl and was in a stalemate with it. Ji Zhuang counterattacked. He did not seek the result of the battle, but only wanted to delay Zhang Yan and regain control of the situation. He glanced at the Greater One Divine Pearl and nodded. Previously, when Zhang Yan did not use the Creation Pauline and the Greater One Divine Pearl, they had always been wary. Without forcing these two things out, they did not dare to fight. Now that the Greater One Divine Pearl had been revealed, the most powerful thing in Zhang Yan's hands should only be the Creation Pauline. After Zhang Yan's punch broke through Ji Zhuang's defense, the hand of profound qi outside his body unexpectedly turned and pressed down on Wei Ming. Seeing this, Wei Ming stretched out his hand and gently pushed. The Weili moved over and blocked the hand of profound qi. At the same time, a thought occurred to him. Although the great virtue Weili was infinite, but to deal with three people of the same generation at once, the power would inevitably be scattered. This move could not pose too much of a threat to him, it should only be to restrain him. However, just as he was thinking about this, Zhang Yan suddenly turned and unexpectedly abandoned Ji Zhuang and Xiangju. With a loud bang, he punched towards him. His expression changed, and with a wave of his sleeve, he swept away the layers of immortal clouds and rainbows. In order to be on the safe side, he hurriedly moved the Weili of the three places of fortune under his jurisdiction over and pressed down on Zhang Yan. With a loud bang, Zhang Yan followed up with another punch, directly breaking the Weili of the Land of Fortune. However, before he could collide with the Weili of Wei Ming's Tao, the Weili of Ji Zhuang and Xiangju had already pressed down. When Ji Zhuang and Xiangju saw that Zhang Yan had turned to attack Wei Ming, they were not surprised but happy. They thought that Zhang Yan had made a wrong move. It was impossible for Wei Ming to be defeated in one move, and at this moment they could attack from behind without any scruples. If they cooperated well, then they might be able to suppress Zhang Yan in one fell swoop. And at this moment, Zhang Yan's eyes suddenly deepened a bit, behind him a brilliant five-colored light suddenly soared, but in the blink of an eye, the Pauline in the hands of the three inexplicably disappeared. The next moment, endless sword light bloomed in front of the three people. Chapter 22:11. Xiangju, Ji Zhuang, and Wei Ming had long been on guard against Zhang Yan's killer move, so when they saw the five-colored brilliance, they immediately tried to resolve it. However, they soon discovered that it contained infinite great Tao, and it was constantly changing, causing them to return empty-handed. Pauline in their hands was instantly swept away by the brilliance. Pauline was the key to keeping Zhang Yan in check. Without her suppression, then the Weili behind Zhang Yan and the land of creation could be mobilized, so they hurriedly recalled her. For no matter where the land of creation Pauline that they controlled fell, they could definitely summon her back with a thought. Therefore, the disappearance of Pauline actually only lasted for a moment. But it was in this moment that the situation in the field was instantly reversed. First, the endless sword light fell. This was a method that Zhang Yan had never used before. Each sword light contained the truth of the great Tao, and it was compatible with the five-colored brilliance. There was no time to resolve it, and the authority of the great Tao on their bodies was weakened layer by layer. This was closely related to their own strength, and if it was all taken away, then they would lose the ability to fight in front of Zhang Yan. With this attack, Zhang Yan did not intend to give the three a chance to fight back. With a thought, Bu Shutian and the land of creation's Weili surged forward, and then a punch was thrown. His attack was like a tidal wave, pressing down layer by layer. In an instant, the joint force of the three collapsed, and they were unable to take care of themselves. Xiangju immediately saw that the situation was not good. At this time, they could not fight alone and only care for themselves. One of them had to stand up to restrain Zhang Yan and give the other two a chance to turn the situation around. Therefore, he ignored the method of attack and directly used the power of impermanence and formlessness to attack the place where Zhang Yan came from. Even if he would be hit by the Dao technique, he had already calculated that this would at most be a Dao technique taken away, and he would not lose the ability to fight back. But as long as Zhang Yan was restrained for a moment, then Wei Ming and Ji Zhuang would be able to find an opportunity to fight back. This was not because he was righteous and selfless, but because he knew that this was the only way to win the battle. If he lost, he would only lose more. Therefore, in his heart he immediately visualized his own Tao, and with a spell in his hand, the Weili suddenly turned into a yin and yang two-colored wind. One fell from Zhang Yan's head, and the other rose from Zhang Yan's feet, and the two attacked from both sides. When he fought with Zhang Yan previously, he was almost defeated in one move. However, he thought that he did not expect that besides the creation Pauline, Zhang Yan had another magic weapon that could fight against the great virtue Weili. If it was purely a Dao technique, he would not be much weaker. If this time, Zhang Yan still did not defend, then his Dao technique would definitely be damaged. When Wei Ming saw this, he felt that something was wrong. What Ji Zhuang was doing now was very decisive, and it was also an extremely correct choice. However, he did not forget that behind Zhang Yan, there was still a creation Pauline that had not been used. If it was taken out, it would not be difficult to bear the consciousness Weili. If that was the case, then the person's efforts would definitely be in vain. Therefore, at this moment, he also had to put in a bit of effort to be able to make up for the lack. His thoughts changed, and he felt that he could not hold back at this moment. He immediately took out a spell, and pieces of light that looked like Gigi cloud rose from the void. In the midst of the faintness, there was actually the sound of the Tao that came out, and there was also a variety of strange phenomena that followed. This was obviously the condensation of his supreme understanding of the Dao technique. When Ji Zhuang saw this, he knew that this exchange would determine the outcome of this battle. If the two of them could succeed, then this battle could still be fought. However, if the two of them returned without any results, then not only would they not be able to recover from their disadvantage, they would also suffer great losses. After Zhang Yan felt the two forces pressing down, he completely ignored them. Other than the strength of his body, he also had the protection of the treasured clothing. Now that the three creation Pauline flowers were no longer holding him back, he did not have to worry about these things. Although the three of them could not resolve the endless sword light for a while, and their own Dao techniques were constantly being weakened, they could move around to minimize their own losses. However, the pressure from the creation Weili that came surging down was not so easy to deal with. This kind of pressure could not be resisted no matter what, especially when the heaven Weili behind Zhang Yan was itself a different Tao. Even if the master had observed it for a long time, it was difficult for him to fully understand its mysteries. They had never seen it before, so it was even more difficult for them to understand. That was not all. Every punch that Zhang Yan followed up with contained great power, and it was not the slightest bit inferior to the creation Weili. At this moment, Xiang Ju gave up his own defense and adopted the method of facing Zhang Yan head-on. Almost every heavy impact landed on his body, causing his Tao techniques to be stripped away layer by layer, and his qi activities suddenly dropped by a lot. When Wei Ming saw this, he was afraid that Xiang Ju could not hold on, so he immediately tried to salvage the situation from the side. However, by doing so, he also gave up some of his defense. In just an instant, he felt that a lot of his Tao techniques were stripped away. Although he did not suffer as heavy a loss as Xiang Ju, he still suffered a lot. However, the two of them fought with all their might, but they did not exchange for the desired result. When their attacks landed on Zhang Yan, they were blocked by an inexplicable force. This force was very similar to the force of his punches. Although it was also in the process of being dissolved, it was difficult for them to break through for a while. But under the Tao techniques, their qi activity continued to decline. Ji Zhuang's heart sank. He knew that there was no hope of winning this time. He had been defending from the beginning to the end, so he suffered the least pressure. In order to avoid more losses, without saying anything, he directly cut off a Tao technique and turned it into a clone to bear the external calamity, and retreated from the divine will. When Xiang Ju and Wei Ming saw this, they also left behind their own Tao techniques as a substitute and retreated from the divine will. Once the divine wills of the three of them dispersed, everything was reflected on their bodies, and the authority of the Grand Tao within their divine wills that had been stripped away naturally disappeared as well. So at this moment, their auras were extremely weak, and their Tao techniques were greatly lacking. They couldn't be compared to when they first arrived. Of course, the great Tao authorities that they lost wouldn't really be lost. They were just stripped away after the battle. So when they faced Zhang Yan Weili, they weren't complete. But when they faced other fellow Taoists, they were still full. As long as they came down and didn't face Zhang Yan for the time being, and went back to observe the great Tao again, it wouldn't take long before they could regain it. Zhang Yan calmly turned his divine will and looked at the three of them. He said indifferently, "What do you three fellow Taoists say?" Wei Ming sighed. If Zhang Yan could defeat them in the divine will just now, then it wouldn't be difficult to deal with them now. He cupped his hands and said, "Since fellow Taoist has won this discussion, we will naturally keep our promise." When he finished speaking, he raised his hand and pushed out the creation Pauline in his palm. Xiang Ju and Ji Zhuang didn't say a word and also sent out the Pauline in their hands. Since they had failed this time, they could only accept the consequences. Fortunately, they could still bear this kind of loss. The creation Pauline would temporarily be entrusted to Zhang Yan. When it was useful, they could naturally take it back. Zhang Yan used his mind to guide the three Pauline flowers into his divine will. Among them, 2 Pauline flowers' qi activity had already been obtained. Only the one in Wei Ming's hand had not been obtained before. Now that he had it, he could obtain another qi activity. And with the 3 creation Pauline flowers in his hand, it would be easier for him to figure out the Tao within. He said, "Since the discussion is over, I won't be accompanying you here." When he finished speaking, he bowed and flicked his sleeve. His entire person instantly stepped into the void. Wei Ming cupped his hands and said, "If there's anything else, let's talk in detail after I've recovered my Tao." When he finished speaking, he also turned and disappeared. Xiang Ju said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang, even though we lost this opportunity, the loss isn't too great. Moreover, after this battle, we have also understood the person's background. We can find another opportunity next time." However, Ji Zhuang shook his head. He could naturally see that the reason why they lost this opportunity this time was because their strength was inferior to Zhang Yan's. Because based on the means that Zhang Yan had displayed, even if they were to fight again, their chances of winning would not be great. At most, it would make the battle slightly longer. He sighed, "Looks like we can only hope to win against this person when the next fellow Taoist comes here." In the Mirror Lake, the Luo sect had obtained a considerable amount of mana and was promoted to a higher position. They continued to invade the boundaries of the Yanjiao and spread the Luo sect's techniques wantonly. Quite a number of altars were attacked by them, and there were some that were in imminent danger. After Tang Yu passed through the Realm Gate, he personally took charge of the Mirror Lake's headquarters. In the Mirror Lake, the number of altars of the sect Yen could be said to be innumerable because they had always been expanding and dying. Now, the reports of conflicts with the disciples of the Luo sect were coming in one after another. It was impossible for him to handle it alone. Fortunately, he had invited many cultivators from the 9 continents to help, so he didn't have to worry about the situation collapsing for the time being. As long as he was here, he could play the role of calming people's hearts. At this moment, a deacon of the branch walked over and handed over a few letters, saying, "Elder Tang, the Jiang branch and the Kunshan branch have reported that they have been besieged by the disciples of the Luo sect." Tang Yu's expression was solemn. In the Mirror Lake, there were 6 major branch altars other than the headquarters, and these 2 were one of them. He didn't expect that this territory would also be attacked. This undoubtedly showed that the power of the Luo sect was expanding very quickly. It seemed that the many cultivators from the 9 continents were unable to really play the role of restraining this generation. He flipped through the letters and said, "This Jiang branch, is it the territory that Guardian Meng is in charge of?" The deacon of the branch said, "Yes." "Elder, do you want to send people to help?" Tang Yu said, "Help what? I've never been in charge of the branch altars in the past, so I don't know about the affairs of the branch altars. Only when I came here did I see it. Many of the disciples here usually rely on the power of the sect to suppress the weak. Once they occupy a territory, they no longer have the heart to improve themselves. They only care about enjoying themselves, and even their Dao techniques are neglected. If they put in a little more effort, even if they can't defeat the Luo sect, they can rely on the formation to defend it, right? What's the use of such useless people?" The deacon of the branch hurriedly said, "The Kunshan branch is fine, but the Guardian Meng of the Jiang branch is a genius. He was once personally taught by Manager Gao. If he were to die..." Tang Yu shook his head and said, "The actions of the Luo sect are not aimless. I suspect that they have other plans this time. Moreover, if the protective formation of the branch is not broken in a short period of time, it means that it is enough to defend against the people besieging it. If this Guardian Meng can't even defend it, then it is not worthy of our attention." After the deacon of the branch came out, he felt that something was wrong. He immediately transferred to Zhang Chan and reported the matter truthfully. After Zhang Chan received the news, he chuckled and thought to himself, "Brat, this is your chance. Let's see how far you can go." Chapter 22:12. Zhang Yan stood in the Qinghuan Palace with his sleeves behind his back, looking at the gap in the void. He had always thought that the biggest threat he faced did not come from the Vedanta, but the spirit of creation that had yet to enter. He had never forgotten that this fellow could only complete his Tao by devouring the Vedanta. Just now in the battle, he also wanted to test it out, but he did not detect any abnormalities from the 3, but this did not necessarily prove that the spirit of creation was not among the 3. If a certain person was just borrowing the form, even they themselves wouldn't know. Perhaps it was because the situation hadn't reached the most advantageous level for them, so the side of the spirit of creation hadn't truly revealed itself. He calculated in his heart. Within the tribulation power, there was still chaos and nothing could be seen. However, from the fact that the spirit of creation and the many Vedanta Wali were trapped together, it could be seen that the former did not have the ability to suppress all the Vedanta at the same time. Otherwise, there would be no Vedanta left. And the Vedanta naturally could not suppress the spirit of creation, but if the Vedanta that returned first were defeated or devoured by the incarnation of the spirit of creation, even if there were only a few of them, then the balance would probably tilt. In fact, even if it came to this step, it was not that there was no chance of victory. As long as all the Vedanta joined forces, there was still a fighting chance. It was just that the Vedanta were not alone, and it was impossible for them to truly cooperate with each other. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before they were defeated. Here, even if someone could hide all the Vedanta into eternal silence, it would be useless. This was because the Vedanta each had their own Tao, and this Tao was also their own Tao. It was difficult for others to understand, and the lost authority of the Tao could not be taken away by their peers. On the other hand, because the spirit of creation was opposed to the Vedanta, it could easily see and seize this part of the Tao from the galaxy of the Tao. Therefore, he had to consider the worst outcome and be prepared to fight alone. In fact, this was also what he hoped for. Only by fighting could he get closer to the origin of the Tao. However, he was very clear that the spirit of creation could fight against all the Vedanta Wali, and its true strength was really unimaginable. Before his body of strength was perfected, he had to continue to delay its arrival. Now that he was suppressing the other great virtues, the spirit of creation couldn't interfere. Unless they could move him away, nothing could be done. Previously, when the three of them worked together and even when Ji Zhuang returned, he suspected that the spirit of creation was behind it. This time, the three of them were defeated by him. If his guess was correct, then the spirit of creation would soon make its next move. However, rather than waiting, it was better to take the initiative and attack. He raised his hand and brought out the 3 creation Pauline flowers. He shone them at the 3 places of creation under the microchip, and the broken creation spirits were all pulled out from the wheel of life and death. He then threw them into the main realms that were attached to the creation fragments. In this way, all of them were placed under his gaze, and it was impossible for them to rebel. Even if they had any tricks up their sleeves, they could only start from somewhere else. As long as they showed themselves, he would immediately suppress them, and absolutely would not give them any opportunity. After Xiang Ju and Ji Zhuang returned, it took a long time for them to recover their mana. Just now, they met again in the divine will to discuss what to do next. However, when Xiang Ju invited them, the divine will was unwilling to respond, so the 2 of them had to give up. Ji Zhuang said, "This Taoist Xuanyuan's mana is complete, and the Pauline in his hand is also complete. But we are lacking mana and the Pauline we control. Unless we can find the Wali, we can't be his opponent. I don't know how he managed to cultivate this kind of magical power." Xiang Ju suddenly said in a low voice, "Bu Xiutian." Ji Zhuang pondered for a moment and said, "You mean to say that his magical power came from Bu Xiutian?" Xiang Ju said, "Just now, Bu Xiutian is the place where the essence of creation is the most abundant. The treasure in Taoist Xuanyuan's hand should have come from there, and he often observes this place, so his understanding of the Tao should be much better than ours." At this point, he chuckled, "The essence of creation collapsed, and the fate of the Tao should have fallen on us. Who knew that when we returned after overcoming the calamity, it would be him who took advantage of it?" Ji Zhuang said, "It's useless to talk about this now. Since we've lost this time, it's better to think about what to do next." Xiang Ju said, "This is what I came to discuss with you this time. I've thought about it carefully, and since I'm not his opponent in terms of mana, I can only think of a way to deal with the nature of creation." Ji Zhuang thought for a moment, and said, "The nature of creation?" Xiang Ju said, "That's right. Since we can't fight for the land of creation, we can first fight for the nature of creation. Right now, we can only compete with him in the battle of Taoist teachings." Ji Zhuang said, "Now that creation Pauline has been taken by him, it's difficult for us Wali to enter Bu Xiutian and the other places of creation behind him, so how can we do this?" Although Pauline could summon them back with a single thought, they still wanted to save face. Just now, they had lost the battle, so they would not immediately go back on their words. Xiang Ju said, "Don't worry, there are still 2 friends who still have the creation Pauline. We can ask them for it and borrow it for now." Above the Ji Yang subaltar, the Luo denomination had already surrounded the place. However, they could not do anything about the strong formation here. Not to mention the formation here, there was also the formation board personally made by the mighty people that Yan Jiao specially exchanged karma points from Yuhuantian. It could be said to be unbreakable. However, since a few months ago, the Luo denomination began to dig the spiritual vein and built spiritual pillars everywhere to disturb the spiritual vigor. They intended to cut off the connection between the formation and the spiritual vigor. The Luo denomination members in the subaltar were originally calm, but when they saw this scene, they all became flustered. After a period of time, everyone could feel that the spiritual vigor on the formation had weakened by a layer. Although it was only a little, it undoubtedly showed that the Luo denomination's method had worked. If no one came to rescue, then this place would be a dead end. However, the subaltars of Yanjiao were besieged. Now that the Luo denomination had intercepted and cut off contact with the main altar, it was hard to say if they could get any help here. Altar leader Yang looked at the Luo denomination Taoists outside every day. His heart was filled with fear. Once again, he came to the outside of the Lawkeeper Hall, but was told that Meng Hu was in seclusion and was at a critical juncture. He was also resentful and said, "I come here every day. Why is Guardian Meng always at a critical juncture?" The gatekeeper disciple lowered his head and said, "I don't know about this." Altar leader Yang had no choice but to leave. The attendant who came with him sighed and said, "Altar leader, Guardian Meng has been in seclusion all day. I think he knows the urgency of the situation and is planning something. It's useless to be anxious now." Altar Lord Yang shook his head. How could he not know what closed-door training was? Others went into seclusion to break through to the next realm and sharpen their Taoist heart. However, Guardian Meng's cultivation had never stopped rising. Why would he need to go into seclusion? He said, "In Yanjiao, only the main altar is the safest. Now that we are trapped in a hopeless situation with no outside help, everyone is in a state of anxiety. If Guardian Meng could show up and not leave this place immediately, it can really calm people's hearts." Due to the easy transmission of Dao techniques, the Yen sect occupied quite a lot of land. Due to the rampaging demons and the revival of the Luoism, in order to ensure the lives of the Yen sect's disciples, the chief of the Mirror Lake had ordered that if the situation was not good, they could retreat in advance. However, this caused many disciples of the subaltars to give up on the subaltars and retreat to the main altar when they saw the Luo denomination coming over, because only the main altar could protect their own safety. This was not wrong, but the direction of consideration was different. Because compared to the occupied territories, the lives of the disciples were undoubtedly more important. As long as they were still alive, they could always take back the territories when their cultivation increased in the future. After that, Tang Yu did not change this rule. Firstly, because of his deep cultivation, he also thought that the founder should value the disciples of the sect more than the foreign territories. Secondly, there were not many people here who were his trusted followers. Although he was the elder of the main altar in name, the orders he gave might not be more effective than the branch master of the subaltars. Furthermore, he thought that this was like a great wave washing the sand. In such a large sect, there would always be someone who could stand up at the crucial moment. Those who could stand firm under the enemy tide would be the true mainstay of Yanjiao's future. Branch Master Yang was now considering the matter of retreat. Unfortunately, the only flying shuttle in the subaltars that could protect everyone was in Meng Hu's hands. If the Guardian did not leave, they could not leave either. A few days later, a disciple suddenly came to report that Meng Hu had come out of seclusion. Branch Master Yang could not help but be overjoyed and hurried over with the attendant. After seeing Meng Hu, he said, "The subaltars have been besieged for many days. Now that Guardian Meng has come out of seclusion, we can leave this place safely." Meng Hu looked at the two and said in shock, "What? The outside is besieged?" The attendant said with a trembling voice, "Guardian Meng, you didn't know?" Branch Master Yang's heart sank. He was still holding on to a glimmer of hope that Meng Hu had not come out of seclusion because he was confident and had a way to solve the problem. He did not expect that he had not heard of this news. He took a breath and said, "Now that the Luo denomination has besieged our subaltars, it will be difficult to defend if this goes on. I wonder if Guardian Meng has a way to repel the enemy?" Meng Hu grunted and said, "Let me take a look at your qi." His eyes focused and a golden light flashed in his eyes. Branch Master Yang and the attendant felt dizzy when they saw it and quickly avoided it, not daring to look directly at it. Meng Hu looked at it for a while and said with a serious expression, "Although the Luo denomination has many people, there are not many who have a high cultivation base. There is only one person who is truly outstanding, so..." He slowly raised his head and said with a heroic spirit, As long as I get rid of this person, the rest are nothing to worry about. Branch Master Yang immediately revealed a look of surprise and asked anxiously, "Guardian, are you confident?" Meng Hu looked into the distance and said with his hands behind his back, "I am confident, but there is an obstacle here." Branch Master Yang hurriedly said, "What is it?" "Guardian Meng, please instruct me. As long as I can do it, I will do my best." Meng Hu said in a low voice, "I am still not his match." There was a moment of silence. Branch Master Yang's eyes twitched slightly. "Since you are not his match, why did you put on such a confident look just now?" The attendant could not help but say, "Guardian Meng, if you are not his match, how are you going to solve the problem?" Meng Hu puffed out his chest and raised his head. "Don't worry, let me go back and cultivate in seclusion. It won't be too late to deal with him when my cultivation base is stronger than him." Chapter 22:13. After Xiang Ju and Ji Zhuang came to an agreement, they personally went to Ji Lian and the purple-clothed Taoist to ask for Pauline. The purple-clothed Taoist didn't have any problems. After learning its use, he only plucked one petal and happily handed over the entire Pauline. Although Ji Lian was unwilling, he didn't dare to refuse. He was only an incarnation of a Weili and could be sent into eternal silence at any time. Thus, he had no choice but to keep one petal with him to guide the Weili and hand over the rest. He also knew that Pauline couldn't take it back for the time being. He could only wait for his Weili to return before he could think of a way to recall it. When these two Pauline were in the hands of Xiang Ju and Ji Zhuang, they recovered most of their power in an instant. The Weili was not much different from the original Pauline. However, at this time, they had a feeling that something was missing from the Pauline. But when they looked carefully, it was clear that nothing was missing. It was just that this thing didn't hinder their use, and according to their calculations, the matter here didn't involve them, so there was no need to investigate further. The two followed the path they had discussed in advance. They each controlled the Pauline and sent the Pauline Weili ripples into a place of creation under Zhang Yan's rule. Bushutian and the others didn't dare to make a move for the time being. Although there was no doubt that the benefits were the greatest, it was also Zhang Yan's most important place. Not only would it be difficult to infiltrate, but if there were any changes, they might be heavily targeted. Thus, it was better to find a corner first. If they could open up the situation, then it wouldn't be too late to think about other things. As the Pauline Weili of creation was transmitted into the place of creation, the two people's path followed it. After all, this was a great virtue path, and there were countless people in the world that were attached to this place of creation. It didn't take long for people's path to obtain this and began to spread it. In the two's perception, there seemed to be faint starlight continuously lighting up in the silent void. Following it, they seemed to be able to see the endless great Tao behind them. Ji Zhuang sighed deeply when he saw this. "I never thought that after the creation essence was destroyed, there would still be a part of the great Tao scattered in the outside world. No wonder Taoist Xian Yuan is so powerful. He has already far surpassed us on this path." Creation and spirituality was a missing part of the great Tao. Obtaining it was the same as obtaining the great Tao. To Vedanta, as long as these spirits of creation could be integrated into their Tao teachings, then they could endlessly observe this portion of the great Tao. The more there were, the more they could observe, and the easier it would be to find them. They only needed to look at it for a short while, but Zhang Yan's Tao had spread to Bu Su Tian and many other places of creation. What he had gained was simply unimaginable. Xiang Ju said, "That's not a problem. Now that we have started our Tao teachings, even though we are a step behind him, we can still catch up. As long as he doesn't follow this path to the origin of the great Tao, then it's still unknown who will be the master of the Tao in the end." He pointed to the place of creation. "Fellow Taoist, since we can't beat this person in a head-on battle, we can only think of a way from here." Ji Zhuang nodded slowly. The great virtue Weili couldn't possibly interfere in the battle between the spirits of creation. Instead, they had to try their best to avoid it. Otherwise, the great virtue's Tao would replace their original Tao, and that would be a waste of effort. Zhang Yan's biggest advantage now was undoubtedly that he was superior to them in the Weili Tao. However, once he avoided this point and changed it to a battle between pure Tao teachings, the gap between them wouldn't be that big, and the influence he could exert would be limited. He tried to calculate and said, now that the Taoist Xuanyuan's Tao teachings are gradually growing, even though he may not be able to destroy my Tao seed, it's still very difficult for us to strengthen ourselves in front of his Tao teachings. We need someone who can protect us. Xiangju smiled mysteriously and said, fellow Taoist, don't worry. I've already thought about it. There's a chess piece here that I can use. Jizhuang said, what is this chess piece for? Xiangju said slowly, naturally, it's the spirit of creation. Jizhuang's expression changed slightly. He took a few steps back and said in a low voice, what do you mean, fellow Taoist? Xiangju said slowly, fellow Taoist, you don't need to be so cautious. I'm not the spirit of creation, but the spirit of creation can use me in the form of borrowing, so why can't I use him? Besides, before he returns, what's there to be afraid of? He paused and said, moreover, what I'm talking about are the broken spirits that are scattered all over the land of creation. Once this person enters the world and reincarnates, his cultivation will far surpass the spirits formed by the qi of creation. He's the seed that was born to protect our Tao teachings. Jizhuang was silent for a long time and said, fellow Taoist, aren't you afraid that this will cause more trouble in the future? Xiangju smiled coldly and said, if you're worried that this will cause the spirit of creation to return first, then you don't have to. Even if I don't use this person, there are still many hidden in everything. Now I'm just taking a few and using them, so what? When our Tao teachings grow stronger, it's all up to me to keep them or to destroy them. Jizhuang saw that even if he objected, Xiangju would still do as he pleased. There was no way to stop him, so he said, then let's do as you say. Xiangju laughed and said, now that fellow Taoist Wei Ming has 3 lands of creation in his hands, there should be a spirit of creation. I'll go get it from him and he won't refuse. After saying this, he turned his divine will. This time, Wei Ming didn't block him and led him inside. After greeting Wei Ming, Xiangju told him the purpose of his visit. Wei Ming shook his head and said, fellow Taoist, you're a step too late. The spirit of creation in these 3 lands of creation has long been taken away by Taoist Xuanyuan. Xiangju was startled and then frowned. He didn't expect Zhang Yan to block their way 1 step ahead, but this didn't mean he had no other way. He sneered and thanked Wei Ming before leaving his divine will. He explained the situation to Jizhuang and said, the spirit of creation also exists in those creation fragments. We can search for it and then push it into the present world. It can still be used by us. Jizhuang said, but its foundation is still a bit lacking. How can the spirit of creation gathered from a mere fragment compare to those born in the land of creation? Xiangju said, that's not a problem. We don't care about how great it can be. It's fine as long as it can be protected for a while. Even if it's just the spirit of creation fragment, it's enough. After saying this, he turned his Weili and took out the spirit of creation from the fragment. Then, with the help of creation Pauline Weili, he sent it into the land of creation. Zhang Yan was originally in a meditative state. He suddenly sensed something and looked towards a certain direction. He immediately saw some clues, but he only smiled faintly. He had always thought that there were countless spirits of creation within everything. Even Vedanta couldn't gather all of them. In this way, no one would be able to obtain the complete Great Tao, and this part would probably never be completed. But recently, after comprehending the Great Tao contained behind the spirits of creation, he noticed that since the sect Yen had grown to such an extent before his eyes, expansion or not was secondary. Instead, he was able to comprehend the Great Tao of this place even more clearly by battling spirits of different Taoist teachings. What was worth noting was that this coincided with his own Taoist heart. He didn't know if this was because his will was naturally compatible with the Great Tao, or because the Great Tao was reflected by his will, so it was like this. He calculated for a long time, but he couldn't figure it out for a while. So, he put it aside for the time being. But since he saw this, he naturally wouldn't deliberately suppress the Taoist teachings of Jizhuang and Xiangju. Instead, he let the sect Yen deal with it themselves. After all, the more intense the fight between the sects, the more he would benefit from it. Mirror Lake, Jiyang Branch Altar. Meng Hu said that he was going back to cultivate in seclusion, so he really did. When the stone door in front of them closed, altar leader Yang and the deacon came back to their senses. They remembered that they came here to ask about the sky shuttle, but they forgot about the proper business. Both of them looked at each other silently for a moment, and both felt a deep sense of exhaustion. The deacon murmured, "Altar leader, maybe after Guardian Meng goes into seclusion he can really win." Altar leader Yang shook his head and said, "Looking at the speed of destroying the spiritual opportunity of the earth vein, even if it doesn't increase anymore, it will only take a dozen years to wear out the outer formation. But no matter how talented Guardian Meng is, I'm afraid he won't be able to improve in such a short time." The deacon thought about it and sighed. The power of the Luo sect was increasing every moment. Even if Meng Hu only needed a few years to come out of seclusion, the situation would be very different from now. Altar leader Yang looked up to the sky and sighed. "Forget it, if the altar is breached, I will sacrifice my life to stop the Luo sect. Let's go, let's go." He strode outside, and the deacon followed him worriedly. When the two of them reached the outer room, just as they were about to escape, the disciple who was guarding the door hurriedly came forward and shouted, "Altar master, please wait. Deacon, please wait. Guardian Meng has come out of seclusion. Guardian Meng has come out of seclusion." Altar leader Yang's footsteps were slightly messed up. He turned around expressionlessly and said, "Guardian Meng has come out of seclusion?" The disciple nodded and said yes. Altar leader Yang and the deacon looked at each other and turned back. Meng Hu was indeed standing there, but he seemed to be a little different from before. Meng Hu looked at both of them and said unhappily, "We agreed to let me cultivate in seclusion first. Why didn't you wait for me?" Altar leader Yang could not help but clench his fists in his sleeves. He tried his best to calm down and said, "Guardian Meng, since you've come out of seclusion, are you really confident?" Meng Hu's face was solemn as he said, "Just now, I'm no longer who I am now." The deacon said happily, "So you're saying that you can defeat him this time, Guardian?" Altar leader Yang looked at him suspiciously. Meng Hu said with a serious expression, "But after my cultivation improved, I observed again. Other than the person I saw earlier, there was another person whose cultivation seemed to be above him. Just now, he's hidden well, so I didn't notice him." The deacon said with a trembling voice, "Guardian, are you going back to seclusion?" Meng Hu pondered and said, "Since you said so, isn't it?" Altar leader Yang directly interrupted him and said, "No, if Guardian Meng doesn't have a plan to retreat, then it's better to take out the sky shuttle as soon as possible. If anything happens, I can still bring the disciples away from here and not get lost here." Meng Hu grunted and said, "Now that things have come to this, there's only one way." Altar leader Yang did not say a word. The deacon could not help but ask, "What is it?" Meng Hu said with a serious face, "Can the two of you ask on my behalf? Just tell them if they dare to respond when I shout." Chapter 22:14. After Ji Zhuang and Xiang Ju passed down their Dao techniques, they waited to see Zhang Yan's attitude. Would he order the sects under his rule to encircle and annihilate them, or would he personally cause trouble for them? Although the possibility of the latter was low, it involved the struggle of the Great Path. But after waiting for a long time, there was no response from Zhang Yan. The two of them speculated that perhaps he didn't care about this matter, or perhaps he thought that his own sect could handle it. But it was undoubtedly a good thing for them, so they sped up the spread of Dao techniques. Ji Zhuang still supported the Luoism, and the sect that Xiang Ju was teaching was called the Xingjiao. This Dao technique only required one wish in one's heart and worked hard to achieve it. Then, one would be able to obtain all kinds of abilities, even food and water could be wished for. But this method of improvement was very limited. The harder it was to obtain, the greater the reward. Those who practiced this technique had to do everything by themselves. It was useless to rely on others. Therefore, if the person who made the wish could become an emperor in the human world from a commoner, then his achievements would be greatly improved. But the position of an emperor itself wouldn't bring any benefits in terms of achievements. And cultivation itself couldn't be used in making a wish. For example, if one wished to reach a certain level, then even if one reached that level in the future, he wouldn't get anything from it. This kind of wish was useless. Therefore, the foundation of making a wish was not to involve in the Tao, but to obtain the Tao. In the beginning, the two sects were more restrained, and only spread their sects in some remote places. But later on, they realized that the Xingjiao didn't come to ask about it. It wasn't known if they didn't notice or ignored it, so they gradually let go. When Ji Zhuang and Xiang Ju saw this, they placed the spirit of creation in the land of creation, allowing it to slowly accumulate power. Only when the time was right would it blossom and bear fruit. In the Jiyang subaltar. Just now, Meng Hu went into seclusion because he wanted to enter his own heart realm to find a way. The heart realm was different from the outside world. Sometimes, a long time would pass, but only a short moment had passed in the outside world. His luck wasn't bad, and he quickly found a way. Therefore, it looked like he just now entered seclusion and then came out. However, in the eyes of outsiders, this seemed like a joke. If it wasn't for branch leader Yang and the deacon being at their wits' end, and if it wasn't for the fact that Meng Hu was the person with the highest transcendence energy in the Jiyang branch altar, he would have left long ago. The deacon asked cautiously, "Protector Meng only wants us to pass on this message?" Meng Hu said, "Indeed." The deacon thought for a moment and said, "Then, shall I go and pass on the message?" Meng Hu waved his hand and said, "Go." The deacon left the mountain gate but did not dare to stray too far away from the formation. He said, "People of the Luo denomination on the other side, listen up. I, Guardian Meng, have something to ask you. If there is anyone in charge, why don't you step forward?" At this moment, in the Luo sect's encampment, a middle-aged Taoist was sitting in a hut. When he heard the clamor, he took care of the disciples outside and said, "Let him say whatever he wants. As long as he doesn't leave the forbidden formation, just ignore him." "What is senior brother sure worried about?" A young man with a feminine face lifted the curtain and walked in. He said playfully, "Why not? It will take 10 to 20 years for us to excavate the spiritual vein and break through the altar. Are we going to waste such a long time here? Since there is someone there calling for us, why don't we go over and ask what's the matter? Maybe he wants to surrender and is interested in discussing the conditions with me?" The Taoist surnamed Shi said, "So far, there has never been a disciple of the Yen denomination who surrendered. Junior brother Duan, you don't have to think about it." Junior brother Duan said, "Precisely so. That's why I want to give it a try. The reason why no one surrendered before was because they all escaped. Now that they're trapped here by me, perhaps they'll have the same thought?" He moved closer. "If that's the case, it will be a great contribution. Senior brother, don't tell me you don't understand. Whoever makes the biggest contribution will be able to worship the hierarch's golden body. It will at least double our progress. If there are any changes in the future, it's better to rely on yourself than others. Don't you think so?" Although the Yen denomination was constantly retreating, the Luo denomination didn't really eliminate many disciples of the Yen denomination. They only occupied some territories that couldn't be used at the moment. The upper echelons of the Luo denomination all knew that the Yen denomination's real strength was much stronger than the Luo denomination. Moreover, they had the help of cultivators from outside the denomination. Now they were only temporarily suppressed by the Luo denomination elders whose mana suddenly increased. When more reinforcements from the Yen denomination arrived, the situation would be very difficult to predict. The Taoist surnamed Shi said, "I won't move. If junior brother is unwilling, I won't stop you." Junior brother Duan laughed and said, "That's fine. If I'm lucky and kill an altar master or protector, then I won't have to stay in this damn place." He brushed aside the curtain and walked outside. He looked up and turned into a conveyance light to the sky. He faced forward. "I am the elder of the Luo denomination, Duan Yi. Where is your protector Meng? Why don't you come out and meet me?" Meng Hu pinched his chin and gave a few instructions to the deacon. Then, he leaped up and said with a face full of righteousness, "I am Meng Hu, the protector of this place. If I call out to you, do you dare to answer?" Duan Yi hesitated. He felt that the other party wouldn't say such words for no reason. There might be some trap in it. Hence, he said cautiously, so what if I dare? So what if I don't dare? Just as he said this, he felt that he was in a trance. When he opened his eyes again, he couldn't help but reveal a surprised expression. He realized that he had actually arrived in an empty and chaotic territory. He immediately realized that he had fallen into a trap. He was annoyed. It turned out that no matter how he answered, as long as he answered, he would be dragged here. He quickly analyzed the situation. The other party's mana was not as strong as his. To be able to move him here for no reason, he must have borrowed something. The threat that the other party could pose to him should be limited. He just had to find a way to get out. At this moment, he changed his mind and saw a Taoist sitting there. He immediately revealed a vigilant expression and said, "Who are you?" The Taoist looked at him and said, "Have you heard of the spirit of creation?" Duan Ye's body trembled. Suddenly, he felt as if he had understood something. He sat down with his legs crossed. After a long time, he stood up again and bowed to the Taoist. Then, his figure disappeared from the place. At this moment, outside, Duan Yi slowly opened his eyes. Meng Hu placed his hands behind his back and said with his head held high, "Do you understand?" Duan Yi was silent for a moment. He let out a long sigh and said, "If you ask in the morning, you will die in the evening." Meng Hu said with satisfaction, "You may leave." Duan Yi bowed and turned to leave. However, he did not return to the Luo Sex formation. Instead, he directly left the place and soon disappeared. The deacons below and altar leader Yang, who was far away, were dumbfounded. They had no idea what was going on. Why did the other party seem to have changed into a different person after answering? What Meng Hu was doing just now was actually dragging the other party into the realm of heart. The Taoist was also him, but that was his original self, the reflection of the spirit of creation's nature. It was the other side of him. After he entered the path of Tao, the reason why he cultivated so quickly was actually on the path of restoring his original self. This was because the spirit of creation originally stood at an extremely high level. From a certain point of view, reincarnation as a human was nothing more than a recultivation from the world. It was just that after entering the world, he had self-awareness, which was the Meng Hu of today. These two sides were actually competing with each other. Only by completely suppressing his original self could he always be himself. However, if he was suppressed by his original self, then the side that represented Meng Hu would gradually disappear. This time, Meng Hu used his original self to show the Tao of the spirit of creation to Duan Yi. This method was not necessarily better than the Luo Sex, but it was better in that there was no concealment and everything was clearly shown. Not only did it point out that Duan Yi was born with the spirit of creation, but it also told him that his own cultivation was to dig out the potential of the spirit of creation, helping him to recognize his original self. After Duan Yi saw this, the Luo Sex method was meaningless to him. Instead, he avoided it, afraid that he would go back to the old path, so he escaped. In the Luo Sex formation, seeing that the elder of his sect had left inexplicably, he immediately reported to the Taoist with the surname Shi. He was also unusually puzzled. After asking around, he said thoughtfully, "You're saying that Taoist Meng asked Elder Duan if he dared to answer, and Elder Duan only left after he answered?" The disciple said, "That's right." The Taoist with the surname Shi looked out and saw Meng Hu's figure, but it was obvious that the latter was inferior to him in terms of mana and cultivation. At this time, he had to appear, not because of Duan Yi, but because if the other party came down to attack the ordinary Taoist of Luo sect, he had to stop him. Although the other party's method was strange and unpredictable, he guessed that as long as he did not answer, it should be fine. Hence, he left the hut, flew into the air, and headed to the front of the formation. Seeing that he was coming, Meng Hu did not hide, but shouted, "I'll call you. Do you dare to answer?" The Taoist with the surname Shi did not say a word, but smiled contemptuously. With the lesson just now had learned, how could he be tricked? However, in the next moment his vision blurred, and he found himself being dragged into chaos. He could not help but be stunned. Immediately, a surge of anger surged in his heart. He did not even need to answer, and the other party was able to drag him into a trap. Then what was the point of asking him this question? At this moment, he suddenly realized that there was a shadow moving in front of him. He took a step back and said cautiously, "Who's here?" After a while, he saw a Taoist walk out and bowed to him and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoist, have you heard of the spirit of creation?" After a while, the Taoist with the surname Shi, who looked like he had seen through the world, bowed to Meng Hu and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist, for dispelling my doubts." After that, like Duan Yi, he abandoned the Taoist of Luo sect and left. At this moment, altar leader Yang and the deacon were speechless. After a long time, the two of them leaped into the sky and came to Meng Hu's side and said, "Guardian Meng, look." Meng Hu looked calm and said, "There are no more cultivators of the upper state of Luo sect. I'll leave the disciples of Luo sect below to the two of you." Both altar leader Yang and the deacon were now full of admiration for him and agreed loudly. They called for the disciples of the subaltars, and each of them took out their magical weapons and rushed towards the formation of Luo sect. At this moment, Meng Hu suddenly thought of something. If he spread the cultivation method of the spirit of creation, it would seem that there would be some unexpected consequences. He grunted, "Anyway, the one who should be troubled should be the Luo sect." He could not care so much. Chapter 22:15. Yuan Jingqing stood on a mountain ridge that was crisscrossed with ravines, his robes fluttering in the wind. Behind him was the boundless land, and above him was the vast sky. A gigantic moon was stuck close to the land, and the craters and undulating mountains on its surface were clearly visible. As the moon moved above his head, it gave off the feeling that it would fall at any moment. This land was especially vast, and the spiritual opportunity was abundant. It was just like the mountain and sea realm before the sects of the 9 continents came to the mountain and sea realm. Over the years, he had traveled through the realm gate and killed more than 10,000 demons. However, he still lacked a demon with superior cultivation to use as a spiritual pivot. Just a few days ago, he had found a fiendish demon called Patriarch Wan Quan through the clues of Yanjiao. This demon was very powerful. Among all the demons he had seen, this demon had the highest cultivation. Not only that, most demons were born with innate talent or were born in a place with abundant spiritual opportunity. Just now, after a long period of time, they would gain great power. And this person actually cultivated the most orthodox Qi Dao. He suspected that this demon might be one of the pre-celestial demons that his teacher had mentioned before, and that he might have received some guidance from some almighty being. Otherwise, he would not have achieved what he had. The sand and dust suddenly rose and spun in the air, casting a shadow. An old man in a yellow robe appeared in front of him. He cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, I have no enmity with you. Why do you have to pursue me so relentlessly?" Yuan Jingqing said plainly, "Demons and otherworldly beings, everyone has the right to kill them." The old man smiled and shook his head, "Fellow Taoist, you and I are both Taoist cultivators. You should know that even though I used to have a demon body, after cutting off my mortal body, I have shed my demon nature." Yuan Jingqing's voice did not fluctuate at all. He said, "You can shed your demon body, but your demonic nature is hard to get rid of. Don't tell me that all the living beings in this world are dying because of you. You have the appearance of a human, yet your actions are cruel and cold-blooded. You view living beings as weeds, and allowing you to continue existing in this world will only endanger humanity. It's best to eliminate you as soon as possible." The old man stroked his beard and revealed an indifferent expression as he said, "They're just some mortals with a lifespan of less than 100 years. It'll pass in the blink of an eye, so what's there to pursue? Fellow Taoist, you and I have long since transcended the mortal world, so why must you pursue us relentlessly for such a trivial matter?" Yuan Jingqing did not say anything more. He glanced at a certain place and walked straight past him. In just a few steps, he seemed to have moved through thousands of mountains and disappeared into the horizon. The old man's expression changed slightly as he looked in the direction he was heading. His eyes revealed a hint of coldness as his figure suddenly disappeared. Yuan Jingqing cultivated the Yuan Qin Divine Cave Scripture. In the past Qinsong school, there had never been anyone below the patriarch who could cultivate this technique to his level. Therefore, he was very good at tracking qi. As long as he targeted someone, it would be impossible for them to escape from his senses. At this moment, he followed the qi and quickly saw a pitch-black mountain lying in front of him. It stretched endlessly as if it was made of metal and stone, and it was suffused with qi that soared into the sky, almost merging into the void. In order to chase after this ancestor Wan Quan, he had already traversed more than 10 worlds. He could sense that it was not that this ancestor Wan Quan did not have the strength to resist. The reason why he fled was actually to find a place where he could exert his strength. Moreover, there were traces of him slaughtering living beings on this land, so it was very likely that this was where this fellow's home ground was. If there were no accidents, he should be prepared to fight to the death with him here. His expression was calm and he did not say a word. The mana on his body instantly soared and wisps of clear light scattered, pushing towards the mountain range that spanned across the land. A mortal metamorphosis cultivator could destroy a heavenly star with a gentle wave of his hand. In just a few short days, the place where the two of them fought was completely destroyed by the aftermath of their magic power. Fortunately, the layout of this place was round and round, boundless and vast, which prevented everything in the surroundings from being shattered into void dust. However, if one looked at it from an extremely far place in the void, there was an additional pitch-black hole on the originally flat land. Even if tens of thousands of stars were to fill it, it would not be able to fill it. Yuan Zhangqing stood above the hole, breathing steadily, as if the person who was fighting just now was not him. Just now, he had killed many of the demon's doppelgangers and lost a lot of vitality. However, the demon's roots were still hidden until now. This battle was far from over. He raised his head slightly and saw that the huge moon that was close to the land was moving. The original potholes and gullies on the surface of the moon condensed, revealing a face with a horrifying smile. However, that was only the head of the person. In the depths of the void, there was an even bigger body. At this moment, one of its hands was holding the land, and the other hand reached out and grabbed towards Yuan Zhangqing. Spiritual light flickered in Yuan Zhangqing's eyes. In the endless void, the stars lit up one after another. Each of them was shaped like a heavenly shuttle, and they pressed towards the moon together. The battle between the two lasted for more than a month. In the end, Ancestor Wan Quan did not manage to escape and was killed on the spot, his spirit and soul destroyed. Yuan Zhangqing looked at the spiritual essence hovering in his hand. He was sure that it was indeed formed by the innate demon. However, he could not find any clues about the cultivation method behind the demon's back. Without a doubt, the demon's cultivation was higher than his. Yuan Zhangqing pondered, "This demon has a strange origin. Perhaps I should ask my teacher when I return." He took out a talisman from his sleeve and threw it out. In an instant, it turned into a realm gate. As the gate shone brightly, he stepped inside and turned to the altar outside the Yinjiao headquarters. He said to the disciple guarding the altar, "Is the master of your sect here? I need to meet him." The disciple guarding the altar did not dare to be negligent and quickly reported the matter. Before long, Gao Guo personally came to the altar. He politely cupped his hands to Yuan Zhangqing and said, "Greetings, Yuan Zhangqing." Yuan Zhangqing returned the salute and said, "I have killed tens of thousands of demons. My achievements have been fulfilled, and I will go back to refine a precious item. Before I leave, I have come to return the item of your sect." With that, he waved his sleeve and handed over a jade slip. When Gao Guo heard that he had killed tens of thousands of demons, he was shocked, but also felt a sense of admiration. He sincerely thanked him and said, "You have worked hard, Yuan Zhangqing. With this, the disciples of my Yinjiao headquarters will be free from the threat of many demons." Yuan Zhangqing calmly said, "It was just a matter of convenience. There is no need to thank me, Master Gao." He pointed to the other side of the realm gate. "Just now, I have come to a place that is not inferior to the mountain and sea realm. I presume it will be of some use to your sect." With that, he saluted again, and with a flash of clear light, he broke through the void and returned to the mountain and sea realm. In the Mirror Lake, in the world where the Jiang division was located, Duan Yi and Daoist Shi left the disciples of the Luo sect and quickly went to another place. After that, they carefully avoided the people of the Luo sect, afraid that they would be captured. Fortunately, as the reinforcements of the Yinjiao sect gradually arrived, the Luo sect was also having a hard time dealing with them. For the time being, they had no time to pay attention to them. But they also knew that this matter would not end. The Luo sect would definitely not let them go. Otherwise, if everyone imitated them, the entire sect would become a pile of loose sand. Therefore, the two of them did not dare to walk outside. They only hid in a remote valley and spent their days training. The good thing about the spirit of creation's Taoism was that it explained their origins. Telling you about the Luo sect's Taoism was guiding their own potential. Since the power originally came from them, it was much better to directly cultivate the Taoism passed down by the spirit of creation than to conceal the Luo sect's Taoism. But the premise was that they had an accurate understanding of their own Tao technique. Without this, it would be impossible for them to do such a thing. After the two of them cultivated here for more than 100 years, they felt that their cultivation had made great progress, and they had the thought of leaving the mountain to explore. After a discussion, the two of them sent out their doppelgangers. Because they were worried that the Luo sect would search for them, they were very careful to conceal their tracks. But the situation they found out surprised them. The Yen sect and the Luo sect had been fighting for many years, but they were actually on equal footing. Neither had been able to overwhelm the other. It looked like the Yen sect was deliberately restraining their own strength, but they did not know what the purpose behind this was. The two of them discussed it and thought that this was a good thing for them. And since they had obtained the Tao technique, they should not only cultivate it themselves, but also try to pass it on. If they could teach more disciples, then perhaps one day they could be mentioned in the same breath as the Luo sect and the Yen sect. So they made a trip to the mortal world, found dozens of children with outstanding aptitude, and brought them back to the valley. In the following years, the two of them cultivated and taught disciples at the same time. But among them, there was a disciple who was picked up from the mountain stream, who was particularly extraordinary. In just a few years, this disciple had actually cultivated to the level of Dan transformation that cultivators talked about. This could no longer be described as having outstanding aptitude, it was terrifying. The two of them felt that his background was extraordinary, but since he was already a cultivator, they could not calculate his origin. So they ordered the disciple to go to the stream to investigate, but there were still no clues. It was as if he had appeared there out of thin air. At this time, the two of them had a faint guess in their hearts, but neither of them said it out loud. Moreover, they thought that this was not a bad thing for the Tao technique they were passing on. Maybe the prosperity of this Tao technique should be on this disciple. In the silence, Ji Zhuang and Xiang Ju sat upright in a fixed world, but at this moment, both of them had a serious expression. In order for their Tao technique to be able to compete with the Yen sect, they had successively invested 5 spirits of creation, hoping that this generation would grow up to be a protector of their sect. However, for some reason, one of the spirits of creation had inexplicably disappeared without a trace. Even if they tried to calculate its whereabouts, they could not find its whereabouts. They faintly felt that there was a problem here. If it was Zhang Yan, there would be no need to go through so much trouble. Wouldn't it be better to directly attack the 5 spirits of creation at the same time? Therefore, they believed that it was very likely that this was the method that the main character had used. However, this person had clearly not returned yet, but was able to do such a thing right under their noses. This made them extremely vigilant and fearful. If it wasn't for the fact that this place of creation was not their territory, they would even have the thought of destroying the various worlds here. Xiang Ju thought for a moment and said, "Friend, this place is still under the rule of Taoist Shenyuan. Even if he has any arrangements, it's not up to us to worry. Since we can't find any clues, let's not bother too much." Ji Zhuang nodded slowly and said, "That's the only way. Taoist Shenyuan is powerful, I think he will be able to solve this matter." Chapter 22:16. Zhang Yan watched as the 4 spirits of creation gradually grew in the land of creation, but he did not express much. He also had spirits of creation that he could use, and they were one step ahead of Ji Zhuang and Xiang Ju. However, a few of them had died in previous battles due to bad luck, and had already reincarnated into 1 or 2 lifetimes. The more intense the battle between the sects, the better. He had already begun to enjoy the benefits. The great Tao of the spirits of creation was becoming more and more refreshing, which was enough to prove that his approach was incomparably correct. Regardless of whether it was the Qi path or the strength path, the more great Tao he obtained, the stronger his strength would be. Of course, the prerequisite was that the great Tao had to be ownerless. The great Tao that had already been obtained by Vedanta could not be taken away by his peers. Perhaps the only one who could do this was the spirit of creation who had yet to return. Just as Ji Zhuang and Xiang Ju had previously thought, Zhang Yan did not miss the 5th spirit of creation. He saw it very clearly. Even though it had been sent to the place of fortune under his rule with the other 4 spirits of creation, it had been affected by a mighty force on the way, and it had been moved elsewhere. Although the concealment method here was very clever, unless it no longer appeared under his rule, it would not be difficult to find its whereabouts as long as he had the intention to look for it. With a turn of his consciousness, he very quickly fell into the mirror lake. This should be the Whaley left behind by the spirit of creation. However, there was no need to think too highly of it. If it really had any ability, it would not have fallen into such a branch. This action precisely showed the powerlessness behind it. Although he had already seen the exact whereabouts of the spirit of creation, he did not have the intention to eliminate it. Those broken spirits of creation formed a separate entity. Other than the one behind it, they could not pose any threat to Dada. Since they were originally not enemies, why push it against him? Moreover, this generation could have been used. With the Whaley push of the spirit of creation, it might indeed have some extraordinary aspects. If it could be taken under the command of Yen sect, it might be somewhat beneficial for promoting the Tao. After thinking for a while, he immediately sent a message to the Mirror Lake. 100 years ago, the crisis of the Jiyang division was easily resolved. The disciples of the Luo denomination who participated in the siege were all taken down. Even though it was not to the extent of being seriously injured, it was inevitable that a corner of the Luo denomination had collapsed. After Yen sect mobilized more forces, they changed their previous style of annihilating the Luo sect and turned to confront it. They only recovered a few extremely valuable places from the previously abandoned territories. In the following days, they mainly focused on consolidating the interior and no longer expanded outwards. After Luo sect tried to attack several times to no avail, they finally gave up on a large-scale attack and also began to turn inward. It was not difficult for them to hold the situation. However, the upper echelons of the Luo sect had always had a deep sense of crisis. They were deeply afraid that the Yen sect would no longer be satisfied with the current situation. Therefore, they had always been worshipping the Taoist ancestor, praying to obtain a higher level of Taoist arts inheritance. As for Yen sect, after the battle, Meng Hu was summoned back to the headquarters due to his meritorious service. He received a lot of rewards. Tang Yu also personally summoned him. However, for some unknown reason, he seemed to dislike others mentioning Meng Hu in front of him. For the past 100 years, because Meng Hu had nothing to do, he also obediently stayed in the headquarters to cultivate. Although it was said to be cultivation, it was actually according to Zhang Chan's request. It was mainly to hone his mind. He also used this as an excuse to spend most of his time either wandering outside or sleeping soundly in the clouds. On this day, he was hiding under a treasure tree and playing with the civet cat that was forced to consume the elixir. However, a disciple rushed over and said, "Guardian Meng, there is a message from Shangzhen." Meng, who was originally lying there lazily. However, the scene of him being beaten up at the beginning of cultivation suddenly appeared in his mind. He couldn't help but shiver. His entire person suddenly became serious. His face was filled with a sense of responsibility as he said, "Teacher, what instructions do you have for me?" The disciple seemed to be a little unaccustomed to his sudden change. He was startled for a moment before he said, "Shangzhen said that there is a matter that needs to be taken care of, Guardian. If Guardian is free, you can go over." Meng Hu said with a serious expression, "How can a disciple delay teacher's summons? I will go now." He put down the civet cat and traveled with the conveyance light. He came to the place where Zhang Chan cultivated. After entering the abode, he saw Zhang Chan sitting cross-legged on the stone bed. He quickly bowed respectfully and said, "Disciple greets teacher." Zhang Chan glanced at him and said, You came quickly. Since you have nothing to do here, I have something for you to do." Meng Hu said loudly, "Teacher, please instruct me." Zhang Chan said, "You are born as a spirit of creation. Therefore, what you do is not to associate with those ordinary people." Meng Hu nodded his head and thought to himself, "Teacher really knows me well." Zhang Chan continued, "I have received a message that a spirit of creation has entered this realm. However, it has not been long since it reincarnated and is still young. There is still a chance for it to change its temperament and not be used by the enemy. What you need to do is to find this person and guide it to the right path." Meng Hu said, "Teacher, do you know where this person is now?" Zhang Chan said, "I was about to tell you about this. Do you still remember the 2 Luo sect elders who retreated without a fight in front of the Jiyang subaltar?" Meng Hu said, "Is the person that teacher is talking about with those 2 people?" Zhang Chan said, "That's right. The message that he received only said that the spirit of creation had come to this world. It did not specify the specific direction. Its whereabouts were found by himself. Although he was not good at deduction, he had countless doppelgangers. Long after entering this realm, they were scattered everywhere. Therefore, it was easy for him to find the whereabouts of the spirit of creation." Meng Hu said, "Teacher, leave this matter to me." Zhang Chan let out a and told him the location of that place. Finally, he said, "Then don't just stand here. Quickly go and settle this matter for me." Meng Hu excused himself. After identifying the direction, he flew into the sky. However, after a few days, he found the location of the altar. He shouted from outside, "Is there anyone here?" Duan Yi and Priest Shi were in the valley. When they heard the voice, they were very nervous. They thought that their territory had been exposed. However, they immediately recognized that the voice belonged to Meng Hu and unconsciously relaxed. They had long betrayed the Luo sect. There was no need for the Yen sect to deal with them. Moreover, Meng Hu was the person who taught them Dao. Naturally, there was no conflict between the two. After confirming that Meng Hu was the only one here, they came out together to welcome him. After greeting him, they welcomed him into the valley and set up a banquet to entertain him. During the banquet, they tried to ask him about the purpose of his return. Meng Hu did not think of an excuse beforehand. He made one up on the spot and said, "I felt that someone was teaching me Dao. Hence, I specially came to take a look." Hearing him say this, Duan Yi and Shi were instantly relieved. Without waiting for Meng Hu to ask, they took the initiative to mention, "These few years, we have taught quite a number of disciples. There are a total of 59 of them." Meng Hu frowned and said, "Is there one less?" Taoist Shi was startled. He looked at Duan Yi and smiled bitterly, "I can't hide it from you, fellow Taoist. You must be here for this child. Someone, summon Gohan here." Meng Hu grunted, "What can't hide it from me? I only said that 60 is one less. Shouldn't you round up the number of disciples?" One of the attendants left the banquet, and before long, he brought back a child with a wooden expression. When the child saw Duan Yi and Shi, he bowed and said, "Greetings to the 2 masters." He then stood aside without saying a word. Priest Shi sighed and said, "I picked this child up from the side of a stream. I couldn't find out who his parents were, so I named him Gohan. His talent is too good. He learns everything quickly and can deduce many things from one instance. He is only 6 years old, but his skills are already similar to those who have formed their Dan. If he continues to cultivate, he might surpass us in no time. Hence, we are too ashamed to accept him as a disciple. We don't dare to let him call us master." Duan Yi said, "This child is good at everything. He does whatever I tell him to do. He has never crossed the line. However, he is too thoughtful. I don't know what he is thinking. He won't tell me even if I ask him." When Gohan heard the 2 of them talking about him, There was no expression on his face. It was as if they were not talking about him. The moment Meng Hu saw this child, based on the subtle connection between the same kind, he immediately knew that this was the target he was looking for this time. He said, "That must be because what the two of you asked him to do was not something he was willing to do." Go Han's eyes brightened. Meng Hu looked down and said, "Are you willing to come with me?" Duan Yi and Daoist sure did not make a sound at the side. To be honest, if Go Han's innate talent was slightly inferior, they could accept it. However, this kind of innate talent clearly showed that he had a great background. They were also nervous to keep such a child whose background was unknown by their side. Since Meng Hu took the initiative to offer to take him away, they could not ask for more. Go Han raised his head and looked at Meng Hu. He asked in a childish voice, "Why do I want to go with you?" Meng Hu took a step forward and patted his head. He said in a gentle voice, "You can do whatever you want now that you are with me." Go Han raised his head and widened his eyes. He asked, "Really?" Meng Hu said in a low voice, "You can't do anything I don't want you to do." Go Han's face stiffened. Meng Hu said, "Tell me, what are you hiding in your heart? With me here, you don't have to be afraid to tell me the truth." Go Han lowered his head and said, "The spells taught by the two masters are good, but they are not fun." Meng Hu touched his chin and agreed, "That is true." It was the first time Go Han heard someone agree with him. He said happily, "Mister, do you think so too?" Meng Hu said matter-of-factly, "Of course. Dao techniques and supernatural powers are used to create all kinds of entertainment for us, not for fighting and killing. Have you tried hanging your hair on a cloud and swinging it? Have you tried twisting your head off and putting it back on? Have you tried blowing away the forest on the grassland in one breath? Have you tried rolling and flattening a mountain range? There is nothing in this world that you can't do. It's just that you can't think of it." Go Han's eyes became brighter and brighter. He asked, "Can I?" Meng Hu said with a serious face, "Yes, as long as you trust me." Go Han bowed to him without hesitation and said, "Mister, I am willing to go with you." Meng Hu nodded in satisfaction. He was very pleased to see that the matter was settled so easily. He had already guided this child to the right path according to his master's wishes. As expected, there was nothing that he couldn't do. Perhaps his master had sent him here because he saw this point in him. Chapter 22:17. Ji Lian was currently cultivating in the fixed world that he had created. With the help of the lotus petal, he was guiding his own transcendence energy. Without the lotus of good fortune, the return of his power was very slow. It was as if the originally gurgling spring water had turned into water droplets on the branches and leaves, and could only accumulate drop by drop. Now he was waiting for the next person of the same generation to return. Only then would he be able to guide more power back. Outside the stabilized world, there was a strange wailing that seemed to be knocking on the door. He knew that there was a visitor. His heart sank. The last time Xiangju came, he borrowed Pauline. Now, someone else came. He didn't know what they wanted. However, his power was weak. To protect himself, now was not the time to offend others. He sighed and went out of the stabilized world. He saw a Taoist in purple outside greeting him, but he didn't know who he was. However, he lacked power and didn't remember many people. He bowed and said, "Friend, where did you come from? I've never seen you before." The Taoist in purple returned the greeting and said, "I came back earlier than you, but I was attacked and had to cultivate until now." Ji Lian said, "Then why did you come here?" The Taoist in purple said, "Aren't you going to invite me in?" Ji Lian thought for a moment, then stepped to the side and said, "Please." The two entered the stabilized world and sat in the host and guest seats. The two exchanged a few pleasantries before the Taoist in purple said his intention. "Because of the fragmentation of the void, our mana returned. However, it was obstructed by the power of calamity. Only a little of it fell into the realm of being. Do you want to get your body back?" Ji Lian's heart skipped a beat. He looked at the Taoist in purple and said, "If that's the case, do you have any ideas?" With his current power, even though he was the incarnation of Vedanta, everyone could bully him. Previously, when creation Pauline was taken away by Xiangju, he didn't say anything. However, he was still brooding over it. If the Weili could return, then this wouldn't have happened. The purple-robed Taoist smiled and said, if it was someone who hasn't returned, it would naturally be very difficult for him to break through the tribulation power and find his mana in one go. However, since your mana has returned first, then your chances are higher than others. At this point, his tone became heavier. I have a method that can help fellow Taoist attract his own Weili the next time a fellow Taoist comes. Zhi Lian couldn't help but reveal a look of surprise. He didn't expect the person in front of him to have such ability. He pondered for a moment before asking in a deep voice, "May I know why fellow Taoist is helping me?" The purple-clothed Taoist took out a lotus petal and said, "Speaking of which, fellow Taoist and I are also being coerced." Zhi Lian came to a realization. He shook his head and sighed, so fellow Taoist Pauline was also borrowed. The Taoist in purple said, originally, with Pauline in hand, it was easy to retrieve the Weili. But now I can only guide the power bit by bit. It's really difficult. However, I don't know when I can get my power back. This method of mine can connect with my true self through the tribulation power. Even if I can't completely return, I might be able to help a fellow Taoist. Zhi Lian understood. The key to this method was to help a fellow Taoist. It might be difficult for one person to break through the tribulation power, but it would be different if two people worked together. He asked, "May I know what I need to do here?" The purple-clothed Taoist said, "Fellow Taoist, you only need to wait for the next time a fellow Taoist comes back and guide your mana with all your might. However," he smiled and said, "if fellow Taoist's power is restored and I can't succeed by then, I hope you can take care of me." Zhi Lian's expression turned solemn. He bowed and said, "If that's the case, I will definitely remember fellow Taoist's kindness." Actually, he didn't believe that this person's goal was so simple. Even if such a good thing could be done, there must be a price to be paid. In his opinion, this person must have other intentions. However, it didn't matter. He didn't need to pursue this matter to the end. If this person wanted to say it, he would say it sooner or later. Moreover, if the Weili could be completely restored, everything would be worth it. At that time, even if he broke his promise, no one could do anything to him. The worst outcome was that he would dissipate and not be able to return in advance. It was very worth a try. However, everything he considered was based on this avatar's understanding. He thought that other than his peers, there was no one who could resist the power of Dada. However, if he knew about the spirit of creation, he wouldn't think so. After the discussion, the purple-clothed Taoist left in satisfaction. After experiencing the mutual perception incident last time, he thought that this might be a method that the original used on him. As long as it involved the return of the Weili, once he agreed, the original would definitely know and then respond. Even he wouldn't be able to resist. He didn't know what the original's goal was, but after thinking about it, if it was really as he thought, it might not be a bad thing. He concluded that because of the tribulation power, the original shouldn't be able to distinguish the internal workings. Perhaps it could only rely on the transmission of his consciousness and then respond. If that was the case, then he could use it in turn. Because he couldn't be completely sure for the time being, this time he wanted to borrow Zhi Lian's hand to give it a try. If the original really did respond without asking for the reason, then he would have the means to secretly compete with the other Dada. On the other side, after Xiangju and Ji Zhuang left their teachings in Zhang Yan's place of creation, they didn't stay idle and continued to search for the place of creation. In the end, their efforts didn't go to waste. With the two of them working together, they finally found a place. However, they didn't dare to take it for themselves. They didn't even dare to look inside to observe the Great Path. This was because once their Weili entered, they would definitely be discovered by Zhang Yan. Then, it would most likely be taken away by the latter under the excuse of guarding against the spirit of creation. Instead of that, it was better to directly send the seed of Tao into the place of creation and leave their teachings there. When the two sects grew stronger, they could then use it to observe the Tao behind the spirit of creation. This way, they wouldn't clash with Zhang Yan, and at the same time, they could climb to the Great Path. Xiangju sighed. Fellow Wei Ming has 3 places of creation that haven't been taken away by Taoist Xinyuan. His teachings can be said to be much better than mine. If I can use those places of his. Ji Zhuang shook his head and said, ever since Taoist Wei Ming lost last time, he's extremely afraid of Taoist Xinyuan. Unless another fellow Taoist comes, he won't stand with us anymore, nor will he tolerate such a thing. Actually, this is also good. If the 3 of us don't stay together, Taoist Xinyuan won't be watching us all the time. Xiangju sneered and said, I don't know how long we'll have to wait like this. Instead of sitting and waiting, we might as well take the initiative to do something. Ji Zhuang understood what he meant and said, fellow Taoist, you mean? Xiangju didn't explain further and only said, fellow Taoist, you should understand what I mean. Ji Zhuang fell into deep thought. He naturally understood what Xiangju was trying to do. He wanted to weaken the resistance of the great virtue Weili. Last time, when the spirit of creation and Pauline collided, it caused the void to crack. Only then did the Weili gradually return. If they were to do it again, perhaps more of them would return. They hadn't acted in this way earlier because they felt that they would be able to obtain more benefits before their peers. However, because of Zhang Yan, their plans had failed. If that was the case, attracting more of their peers back was also a solution. However, he had some misgivings about this as well because this was an extremely risky move. It wasn't up to him to decide who would return. If it wasn't someone from the same generation and the spirit of creation was drawn over, wouldn't that be courting death? He glanced at Xiangju. This person's actions made him feel very dangerous. Before he could confirm whether the other party was the spirit of creation or not, he couldn't blindly agree with his suggestion. So he said, this doesn't seem appropriate. It's not like we don't have any Taoist techniques to use now. Let's think about it later. Xiangju smiled and didn't dwell on this matter anymore. He also knew that going too far was as bad as not going far enough. If he made Ji Zhuang suspect him and really regarded him as the spirit of creation, then the 2 of them could no longer work together. At this time, Ji Zhuang said, what do you want to do with the spirit of creation here? Leave it alone, or move it somewhere else? Xiangju said, it's better to send it somewhere else for reincarnation. If it enters the world here, it may attract Taoist Xuanyuan's attention. He might follow this clue and see this place. Ji Zhuang pondered for a moment, then said, that's fine. He used his Weili to move the spirit of creation out and sent it to the land of creation that was confronting the sect Yen. But just now, after doing this, his expression suddenly changed. Xiangju noticed something was wrong and said, is there something wrong? Ji Zhuang frowned and said, I wanted to send it to the sect, but I didn't expect that as soon as it entered the world, the connection with the magic power was cut off. I don't know if this is the doing of Taoist Xianyuan. Xiangju was also shocked. This wasn't the first time they had encountered something like this. If this was really the doing of the spirit of creation, then the power it could display was far beyond what they had originally thought. Somewhere in the world, a realm gate of the sect Yen stood on an altar. After a moment, there was a flash of spiritual light, and dozens of cultivators walked out from it. Among this group were cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, as well as people from the myriad heavens. Over the past 100 years, many disciples who went out to train would go to various worlds through the realm gate of the sect Yen. The dozens of people were about to leave the altar when they suddenly heard the cry of a baby. Someone joked with the disciple guarding the altar, fellow Taoist, did you get married here? The disciple shook his head and said, what are you talking about? There's no one else here except for I, and there's no mortal within a 1,000-mile radius of this altar. Hearing this, everyone felt it was strange, so they left the altar and followed the sound. In the end, they didn't find any baby on the riverbank, but a bright red jade that looked like a baby. It was only the size of a palm, and it was warm and translucent, delicate and smooth. Everyone thought that it was a wondrous item. However, it did not reveal any spiritual energy, so no one took it seriously. After a while, a female cultivator named Zhuo Qingqing obtained the item. But the moment she held it in her hand, she suddenly felt that the jade that looked like a baby seemed to smile at her. She was shocked, but when she looked at it again, She didn't find anything strange, so she put it away in the sachet. Chapter 22:18. Although Zhuo Qingqing and her group entered this world through the gate of Yinjiao, they did not plan to stay in the guest house arranged by Yinjiao. Instead, they stayed in the branch of Anetta Temple. Although Yinjiao was rumored to be a Taoist technique passed down by Yuanzun, there was no need for spiritual opportunity to cultivate it. It was not the Taoist technique of the past. It could be considered a new Taoist technique, so the cultivators of the old sects always felt that there was a gap between them and the people of the new sect. Anetta Temple was different. Nowadays, their branches were spread all over the world. Not only did they not clash with any sects, they also suppressed evil and demonic beings everywhere. They were even more trustworthy. 3 years passed in a flash. Every disciple who came to train, as long as they were able to survive, had their horizons greatly improved, and their cultivation had also improved. However, among this group of people, the one who improved the fastest was not the most outstanding people, but Zhuo Qingqing. During these days, Zhuo Qingqing only felt that her body was stable and her qi dynamic was lively. She could quickly get rid of distracting thoughts when she cultivated, and there were almost no obstacles in the improvement of her magic power. This was really unbelievable to her. She realized that it might be the effect of the baby jade, but when she thought about the smile on the jade that day, she felt a little uneasy. Although she came from a small sect in the mountain and sea realm, she was knowledgeable. She knew that some things seemed to bring great benefits on the surface, but in reality, they might not be good things. After thinking about it, she decided to ask an expert to examine it. Fortunately, the cultivators of Anetta Temple were good at this, so she did not need to look outside. She came out of her residence and walked to the front of the main hall. She told the guarding disciple that she wanted to see the master. The master of this branch was surnamed Lu. After a few months, he was very familiar with the cultivators who lived here. When he saw Zhuo Qingqing looking for him, he immediately invited her in. After greeting her, he smiled and asked, "What is it, fellow Taoist Zhuo?" Zhuo Qingqing said, "Master, I obtained a treasure a few days ago, and it has benefited my cultivation. However, the origin of this item is strange, and it makes me feel uneasy. Therefore, I came here to ask Master Lu to appraise it and distinguish good from evil." Master Lu stroked his beard and said, "Oh? Where is the item that fellow Taoist Zhuo mentioned?" Zhuo Qingqing took out the baby jade from the sachet and handed it over. Headmaster Lu took it and secretly used the secret technique of Anjin Temple to observe it. On the surface, other than the bright red color, there was nothing wrong with it. He pondered for a while and said, "Fellow Taoist, please wait." He turned to the back of the hall. With his own abilities, since he was unable to identify it, then he could only ask for the help of the treasures in the lower house, so he turned to the ancestral hall. In a temple slayed demons and suppressed evil. On top of every branch's altar, there was a precious mirror that was sacrificially refined by the main altar. It could reflect many evil spirits. He placed the baby jade stone under the mirror and allowed the light to shine on it. After a short while, he saw a stream of light seeping out from it. He was dazzled and realized that this was indeed a treasure. However, after looking at it over and over again, he didn't notice anything strange. However, he felt that there might be something wrong with it. After thinking for a while, he came out and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhuo, this item is indeed mystical. However, I can't tell right now. If fellow Taoist is not worried, you can leave this item here for a few days. I will definitely give you an explanation." As he said this, he added, "Of course, if fellow Taoist is unwilling, you can take it back at any time." Zhuo Qingqing hesitated for a while and said, "All right, then I will leave it here with Headmaster Lu." Headmaster Lu nodded and said, "Fellow Taoist, don't worry. It won't take long." After Zhuo Qingqing bowed, she bid farewell and left. In order to verify the effect of this item, Headmaster Lu kept it by his side. After a few days, he felt that his mana had improved a lot faster than usual. What surprised him the most was that when he sat with this item, many things that he usually couldn't figure out were instantly solved. After a few more days, a strong thought surged in his mind. If this treasure was so useful, why not take it for himself? When facing Zhuo Qingqing, he could easily say that this was an evil item. However, this method was too crude and anyone could see that something was wrong. After thinking for a while, he had an idea in his mind. However, after a month, Zhuo Qingqing came looking for him again. Without this jade, her cultivation slowed down again. It was difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. She was used to advancing quickly, but now she had returned to her original state of accumulating mana bit by bit. This was somewhat unacceptable to her, so she couldn't help but ask about the situation. Headmaster Lu placed the baby jade on the table and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Zhuo, I still haven't found anything strange. This item should be fine. Fellow Taoist can take it back and take good care of it." Zhuo Qingqing was overjoyed and at the same time let out a sigh of relief. She took the baby jade back and said gratefully, "Thank you, Headmaster Lu." Headmaster Lu waved his hand and said, "It's just a small matter. However, fellow Taoist, please wait a moment." He took out a talisman from his sleeve. "This is a talisman that I brought from the main altar. It can suppress evil spirits. You might as well keep it with you. That way, if anything happens, it can help you block it." Zhuo Qingqing did not decline. After sincerely thanking him, she retreated. Now that she had the knot in her heart, she no longer rejected the jade stone. She often carried it with her, and her cultivation improved. After more than 20 years, her cultivation had already surpassed most of her peers. At the same time, she was also highly regarded by many of her fellow Taoists. One day, an elder of the Luo sect appeared in a place and she was ordered to intercept him. When she was fighting with the elder at a critical juncture, her qi dynamics suddenly disappeared for a moment for no reason. How could there be the slightest mistake in a battle between cultivators? Just when she thought that her life was in danger, a strange qi suddenly emerged from the jade and made up for the missing power. That was how she was able to avoid the crisis and kill the Luo denomination elder. However, at this time, she felt nauseous and dizzy. She had no choice but to find a mountaintop to land on and release a hut. She stumbled and hid inside. She felt a surge of energy rushing up and spat out a ball of red light. When the light dissipated, there was a baby lying inside the hut. She couldn't help but turn pale with fright. She couldn't figure out what was going on. When she came back to her senses, she stretched out her hand to touch it, only to discover that the jade had disappeared without a trace. How could she not understand that the jade was related to the baby? She realized that this child was not simple. She immediately raised her hand, but when she saw the child's innocent eyes, she could not do it. In the end, she sighed and hugged the child. She thought to herself, "As long as I don't say anything, who will know?" At this moment, she sensed something and shouted, "Who's there?" A gust of wind blew and the curtains fluttered. A Taoist was standing outside. When Zhuo Qingqing saw him, she was surprised. "Headmaster Lu, why are you here?" Headmaster Lu looked at her and smiled. "You don't have to hide. I don't believe that you can't see that I've done something to the talisman." Although he had the intention to take the jade baby, he knew that it was not possible to do so openly. It was easy to leave an opening, so he deliberately did something to the talisman. Once Zhuo Qingqing fought with an evenly matched opponent, it was possible that the item would be activated. However, for some reason, he did not do anything to it. However, he had a second method, which was to come and take it himself. After so much time had passed, as long as he did it cleanly, no one would link him to this matter. When Zhuo Qingqing heard this, the surprise on her face disappeared. She asked coldly, "What do you want?" Headmaster Lu looked at the baby in Zhuo Qingqing's hand and said leisurely, "I've endured for so long just to get this item." When he finished, he did not waste any more words. He pressed his fingers together and in an instant, there was a flash of lightning that split open the hut and landed inside. Zhuo Qingqing's jade face turned pale. She recognized that this was the demon-subduing thunder technique from Huanjin Temple. However, it could also be used to kill Taoists. Although the two of them were of similar levels, the other party was from Shenmen sect. He knew many supernatural powers and Taoist techniques. His power was great and it was not something that a small sect like hers could compare to. She quickly took out a protective pearl and placed it in front of her. However, with a bang, the pearl turned into a pile of charred flesh and fell. It was destroyed by the lightning in an instant. Master Lu's eyes glowed with a faint red light. He opened his palm and a pai xiu made of ink lines flew out toward Zhuo Qingqing. Even before it reached her, the roar had already locked her in place, making her unable to move. However, what surprised him was that the pai xiu's shadow bit the air. His expression changed. The place where Zhuo Qingqing was standing was empty. It looked like she had moved to another place. It was impossible for her to do it on her own. She must have borrowed the help of an external force. He was not impatient. If Zhuo Qingqing wanted to protect that child, then she would not dare to spread this matter. Therefore he still had a chance. He tapped his feet and his gangqi revolved. He had already soared into the sky. In a cave residence in the Yanjiao branch altar, there was a glint in Zhang Chan's palm. There was an object that was circling inside. He was refining a treasure. At this moment, a disciple's voice came from outside. Lord Zhen, there's another decree on the method developing tablet. Zhang Chan immediately stopped and ordered to bring it in. After reading it, he thought to himself, since it's the old master's decree, then I can't ignore it. In reality, Zhang Yan was in the Qinghuan Palace to observe the Great Tao. He would not pay attention to these matters from time to time. However, the Weili that he left here would respond on its own. It would pass down the decree and get rid of everything that might be detrimental to the Yanjiao. Zhang Chan could not be bothered to think too much about it. He took care of his disciple and said, "Call Meng Hu here." Not long after, Meng Hu came in and bowed. "Teacher, disciple is here." Zhang Chan said, "Today, another spirit of creation has entered the realm. However, it is not in this realm, but in another heavenly region. I expected that you would be the one to handle such matters in the past few times. This time, it is better for you to go. Remember, don't mess it up." Meng Hu felt wronged. "Teacher, when did disciple let you down?" Zhang Chan snorted. He thought of the matter of Gohan. He glanced at him and said, "I hope so." Chapter 22:19. Zhuo Qingqing originally thought that she couldn't escape Master Lu's methods, but she didn't expect that at the critical moment, a power emerged from the baby and teleported her away. When she reacted, she didn't dare to stay in the same place for long and hurriedly fled in the opposite direction of the branch of Anjin Temple. Just as Master Lu guessed, she didn't dare to expose the person because the child in her arms would be exposed. She could feel that the child was connected to her by blood and breath. If she reported it, then she would be implicated as well. Plus, she didn't want to do that. On the contrary, if she didn't say anything, no one but Master Lu would pay more attention. Hiding from one person was much easier than hiding from all the cultivators. She decided to leave this world. As the branch master, Master Lu couldn't leave the branch altar he was guarding for a long time. This way, she could avoid being tracked. Once she made up her mind, she immediately rushed to a realm gate. Along the way, she was very worried that Headmaster Lu might have guessed her purpose. Although he could not determine which realm gate she would use, with his friendship with the Yanjiao, he would probably be able to get someone to stop her with just a flying letter. However, she was thinking too much. The Yanjiao always followed the rules when doing things, and there were strict rules. Unless the main altar gave the order, they would not care about personal feelings and face. Therefore, this time, she passed through the realm gate smoothly and went to the other side of the world. Less than an hour after she left, Master Lu came here following the aura. There was no surprise on his face. He could guess that Zhuo Qingqing would most likely find a way to leave. Although the realm gate was in the hands of the Yen sect, he had a way to stop it if he really wanted to. For example, he could use the excuse of a demon pretending to be a cultivator and make all the realm gates of the Yen sect refuse to allow cultivators to pass through. However, this would cause too much of a commotion and easily expose his purpose. One had to know that when Zhuo Qingqing obtained the baby jade stone, there were many people who saw it. Some people might associate it with this matter. Most importantly, Zhuo Qingqing could teleport away in a moment of crisis last time. She might be able to do the same this time. Then the situation would be difficult to deal with. It would be better to let her leave this world first, and then he would go back to find her. That way, he wouldn't have to be so restrained. As the leader of the branch of the Ineta Temple, he could not leave his post, but no one forbade him from doing so. He had been in this position for nearly 300 years, and had long accumulated enough merits. He could already hand over all sorts of matters and return to the mountain and sea sect to report on his duties. During this period of time, he had enough time to complete what he wanted to do. After some consideration, he decided to put Zhuo Qingqing's matter aside for now. At that time, he had not only done something to the talisman, she would definitely not be able to escape from his hands. After sneering a few times, he turned around and returned to the branch courtyard. After Zhuo Qingqing successfully passed through the world gate, she was afraid that Hall Master Lu would catch up to her, so she didn't dare to stop. She passed through many worlds and finally arrived at a remote place. Here, she changed her name to Li Huaixing and found a way to join a sect that wasn't too big or too small. With her yuanying state cultivation, even in a large sect, she could enjoy the status of an elder. Here, she was even more courteous. After more than 10 years, she could be considered to have gained a foothold. However, for some reason, the baby formed by the red light never grew up. Fortunately, its intelligence was growing like a normal child's. This was the only thing that made her feel gratified. For the convenience of taking care of him, as well as to conceal herself, she hired someone to build a flying carriage so that she could fly to and fro. She didn't want to expose this child in front of others. Thus, although she had accepted a few disciples over the years, none of them knew that she had such a child by her side. On this day, Zhuo Qingqing was riding a carriage while bringing a few disciples out for a patrol, and they arrived at the highest peak of the continent, Return Peak. As she gazed at the dazzling river of stars in the night sky, she couldn't help but sigh with emotion. The boundless land beneath our feet is actually only a single earthly star, whereas there are countless other similar earthly stars occupying the outer space. Only by cultivating a superior Tao art would one be able to leave the land beneath our feet and roam the universe to see even more of the world. On the surface, her words were meant to broaden the horizons of her disciples, but weren't they also meant for her to hear? Every time she looked into the endless void, she felt how small she was. If she could cultivate to the Grotto Heaven realm, then she could go to any world and wouldn't have to fear Hall Master Lu. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded. "Fellow Zhuo, are you still thinking of going to another world?" "That's true. Ever since you obtained that item, your cultivation has advanced by leaps and bounds. Perhaps in a few hundred years, you'll be able to enter that realm." "Who's there?" A disciple sneered. Zhuo Qingqing's heart tightened, but she forced her expression to remain unchanged. She said in a calm tone, "Fellow Zhuo, you finally found your way here." Hall Master Lu said, "Oh? Looks like fellow Zhuo already knew that I would find this place." Zhuo Qingqing said to those disciples, "This is an old friend of mine. I still have some old matters to attend to with him. You can all go back first." These disciples could also see that these two people seemed to be enemies and not friends. However, they also understood that not only would they be of no use here, they would only be a hindrance. Thus, they obeyed and left. Hall Master Lu glanced at them but didn't stop them. He didn't take these disciples seriously. As for using these disciples to threaten her, that was even more of a joke. It was impossible for Zhuo Qingqing to give up her life for these disciples. Zhuo Qingqing waited for these disciples to leave before she said, "May I know how Hall Master Lu found me?" Hall Master Lu said, "When we Taoists pass through the realm gate, the disciples who guard the altar of Yanjiao will keep our appearance and qi dynamic. In case something happens, it can be used for investigation in the future. It's not difficult for me to find the whereabouts of a person like you who disappeared for no reason with the excuse of investigation. Moreover, although the talisman with you is gone, the secret technique of Anjin Temple has always been kept. Unless you break through the void and leave by yourself, I really can't do anything to you." Zhuo Qingqing sighed. "I see." She looked at him calmly. "If I hand over the precious jade, will fellow Zhuo let me go?" Hall Master Lu said, "Why do you have to ask? You know that if this matter were to be spread, Anjin Temple wouldn't tolerate me. Even if you're not willing to say it now, it's hard to guarantee that you won't say it in the future. Zhuo Qingqing sighed. I'm just telling myself not to take any chances when we make a move later. The precious jade was long gone. Even if she was willing to hand it over, she couldn't take it out. She only asked this to tell herself that there was no way out now. Hall Master Lu looked at her up and down and said, "It seems that after all these years, fellow Zhuo's cultivation has improved greatly?" "That's right, you've had the jade for many years. However, I have to tell you that cultivation experience and mana can be accumulated through this item, but supernatural Taoist techniques are passed down." As he spoke, he raised his hand and a thunderous fire shot out. Zhuo Qingqing indeed did not practice superior supernatural Taoist techniques, but with the power of the jade, her mana was now far superior to her peers. Even if she only used the wind to block, she could still break through the supernatural Taoist techniques. However, after a dozen rounds, she realized that she had overestimated her own abilities. Hall Master Lu's methods were far beyond her expectations, and he was experienced and ruthless. He pressured her to the point where she had no way to fight back. Actually, if Zhuo Qingqing looked at Hall Master Lu with the same eyes she had 10 years ago, it wouldn't be wrong. However, how could Hall Master Lu not know that she could rely on the jade to improve her cultivation? After he had retired from his position as Hall Master of the branch monastery, due to the merit he had accumulated, he could choose a superior supernatural Taoist technique to cultivate. He had been diligently cultivating this technique for the past few years, and after making sufficient preparations, he had come to find her. After fighting for a day, because Zhuo Qingqing had to use her own mana to block her opponent's supernatural Taoist technique, her consumption was several times that of her opponent's. As a result, before she ran out of energy, she turned around and fled. She hadn't expected Hall Master Lu to immediately chase after her. She knew that this time he was determined to take her life, but how could she be willing to be defeated just like that? She immediately used her Taoist technique to temporarily throw off Hall Master Lu. However, just as she was about to find a suitable place to set up a restriction formation and recover, she found that her mana had been completely used up. She couldn't help being startled. According to her original plan, she should have at least been able to use a Taoist technique once. Just now, she seemed to have been hit by a ray of light. However, there hadn't been any abnormalities at that time. Now it seemed that she had been careless at that time and had fallen for Hall Master Lu's technique. She tried to swallow a few medicinal pills, but they didn't have much of an effect. After recovering a bit of her mana, it disappeared again. Right at this moment, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching, and she couldn't help but sigh. Looks like it's impossible for me to escape calamity this time. But I won't allow anyone to seize my child away. She gritted her teeth and forcefully gathered a strand of her magic power, intending to slap open the flight talisman she prepared on the infant. But every time she exerted force, she was just a little bit off, and it caused her to be both terrified and anxious. The footsteps suddenly stopped and a voice said, "The person inside, hurry up and come out. Don't think that you can scare me just because you're hiding inside without making a sound." Zhuo Qingqing was stunned. She could tell that it wasn't Hall Master Lu's voice. She smiled bitterly and said, "It's not that I don't want to come out, but I really can't." The curtain of the carriage moved without any wind and was lifted. A young cultivator walked in and looked at her. He touched his chin and said, "This is the spirit-swallowing demonic insect. It's rare." Zhuo Qingqing didn't know what kind of technique she had fallen for. She didn't expect this person to have such good eyesight. She couldn't help but be surprised and happy. She asked hopefully, "Fellow Taoist, can you help me get rid of this insect? I'll definitely repay you." The young cultivator said straightforwardly, "That's settled then." He pointed his finger and a cloud of smoke rose from Zhuo Qingqing's body and the inside of the carriage. Soon it disappeared. Zhuo Qingqing tried but found that it was still useless. She hurriedly said, "Fellow Taoist, why can't I circulate my mana even though you've gotten rid of this insect?" The young cultivator explained responsibly, "This is because this demonic insect lives on a little spiritual vigor. You can't circulate your mana because you've been hit by the divine light of Huanjin Temple." Chapter 22:20. In the depths of the void, the purple-clothed Taoist suddenly woke up from his meditative state. His expression changed slightly. He remembered that he was not meditating, but something like this had happened. However, he did not panic. He calmly examined his body and soon found something strange. His body seemed to have been swapped again, but he had inherited the memories of his previous body. Although there didn't seem to be any changes on the surface, based on his previous experience, he clearly knew that he had already passed on the matter of helping Jillian obtain mighty power to the main body. This proved that his previous inference was indeed correct. As long as there was a great virtue or a great virtue's avatar that made a request to him, regardless of whether he initiated it or it was the other party's own will, once he made a promise, the great virtue would respond to it. He could not help but shudder. This confirmed his previous conjecture. The connection between him and his original body was much closer than he had previously thought. He was half happy and half worried about this result. The worry was that he had always been a single entity and did not want to be involved with his original body. Now it seemed that it would be very difficult to cut off this connection. The joy was that this undoubtedly meant that his original body did not know what he was really thinking. So as long as he arranged it properly, he might be able to use this power to free himself from the restraints. However, he also knew that this power must have its limit. At most, it could only affect a Vedanta really slightly when they returned. If a Vedanta wanted to break the power of retribution, it would definitely be impossible. If his original body had this ability, he would have returned to the Vedanta long ago and would not have to resort to these methods. As his thoughts turned to this point, he suddenly had an idea. Immediately, his divine will turned and connected with Xiangju. The two talked in secret for a long time before they separated. After Xiangju withdrew from the divine will, he pondered for a long time. Then, he turned his divine will and tried to guide Jizhuang. A moment later, his divine will descended. Thus, both of them were confused. After greeting each other, Jizhuang asked, "What business do you have with me?" Xiangju said, "Fellow Taoists said you would reconsider my previous proposal. Have you considered it?" Jizhuang glanced at Xiangju. His rejection last time was actually a disguised rejection. He didn't believe that Xiangju couldn't tell, but he didn't expect him to ask again. He slowly said, "I've thought about this matter when I returned, but there are still many inappropriate areas. If the spirit of creation returns early because of this, what should we do? Unless fellow Taoist is related to the spirit of creation, then there's naturally nothing to fear." Xiangju laughed and said, "Fellow Taoist must be joking. After careful consideration, this method is indeed lacking in consideration. It is better to find another method." Jizhuang said, "What do you have in mind, fellow Taoist?" Xiangju said, "We are constantly drawing in our own magic power. Although this is to restore our original strength as soon as possible, we are inadvertently competing with fellow Taoists who are trapped in the robbery power. This is very likely to cause our returning Taoists to have incomplete magic power. How will we be able to fight against Taoist Shenyuan then?" At this point, his tone became more serious. "Why don't we both give up on this mission and bring back a fellow Taoist who is stronger than both of us? If we succeed, that person will definitely take the initiative to fight against Taoist Shenyuan for the sake of the Tao. At that time, we will have a chance to turn the tables." Jizhuang thought for a moment and said, "It seems that fellow Taoist already has a plan. Then who is fellow Taoist going to summon?" Xiangju smiled and said a Taoist name. When Jizhuang heard this name, his expression froze. He glanced at Jizhuang. "This person?" He lowered his head and muttered to himself. After a long while, he said, "This matter needs to be considered at length. Huanshan realm, on a barren mountain somewhere." Hearing the young cultivator's explanation, Zhuo Qingqing was so angry that she wanted to curse. How could she know that the demonic insects he mentioned were completely different from what she understood? However, the situation was critical now, and she did not have the mood or energy to pursue this matter. She panted a few times and said, "Since fellow Taoist knows what kind of method I am trapped in, can you undo the divine light of accumulation on me?" The young cultivator's expression was very relaxed and he still replied readily, "It is nothing." He waved his sleeve and Zhuo Qingqing's body rippled with an ethereal aura. It then spread in all directions and quickly disappeared. Zhuo Qingqing only felt the pressure on her heart disappear, but when she tried to circulate her magic power, she was shocked to find that her body was empty. Her magic power had disappeared, and the few strands that she had gathered using medicinal pills had also disappeared without a trace. She couldn't help but ask anxiously, "Why did my magic power disappear?" The young cultivator said with his chest puffed out, "Oh, the divine light of accumulation is mixed with mana. If an outsider wants to expel it, without the secret technique of the Huanjin Temple, they can only eliminate the mana and get rid of the light. Don't worry, there is no divine light of accumulation left in your body." Hearing this, Zhuo Qingqing felt the world was spinning and she fell on the bed. She said bitterly, hello." The young cultivator pondered for a while and said, "Yes, hello." Zhuo Qingqing was so angry that she couldn't speak. However, after the intense emotions, she gradually calmed down. She couldn't blame this person. He was a total stranger to her, so why would he help her for no reason? It was already good enough that he helped her, so it was unreasonable for her to blame him. At least he didn't mean any harm and didn't want anything from her. Otherwise, why would he be so polite to her? At most, he helped her out of kindness. She sighed. It seemed that this was the will of the heavens. She reached out her hand and lovingly stroked her son's cheek. Then, she begged the young cultivator, "Fellow Taoist, could you help me this once and take my son away? You can take anything in my carriage as you please." The young cultivator grunted and walked forward. He took the baby from her arms and asked the child, "What is your name?" The child replied with a childish voice, "My name is Zhuyu." Zhuo Qingqing couldn't bear to see her child being taken away. She held back her reluctance and closed her eyes. However, after waiting for a while, she didn't hear any movement. When she opened her eyes, she saw that the young cultivator was staring at Zhuyu without blinking. She couldn't tell what he was thinking. She was shocked and became nervous. She thought to herself, could it be that this person has discovered something strange about my child? She was afraid that this person would really discover something, so she urged, "Fellow Taoist, quickly take your things and leave. There's an enemy chasing after me and he might come at any time." "I'm afraid it'll be too late to leave." The young cultivator didn't answer. His expression was solemn as he stared at Zhuyu. It looked like he was thinking about a matter of life and death. Zhuo Qingqing felt even more uneasy. After waiting for a while, she couldn't help but ask with a trembling voice, "Is there something that fellow Taoist can help me with?" The young cultivator said in a deep voice, "I want to change his name." Zhuo Qingqing was stunned and only reacted after a while. Although things weren't what she thought, she couldn't help but wonder if it was a mistake to hand this child over to this person. However, she didn't have any other choice at this moment because danger was really right before her eyes. She urged anxiously once more, "Fellow Taoist, leave quickly. I'm really not joking. If that person comes, then all of us." Just at this moment, she heard a rumbling sound in the distance. Zhuo Qingqing's face turned pale and she turned to look. She saw a streak of light descending from the sky, and as the light dispersed, Academy Master Lu walked out. She couldn't help but feel a wave of despair in her heart, and she collapsed powerlessly. When Academy Master Lu caught up to her and saw that there was actually a young cultivator standing beside Zhuo Qingqing, he unconsciously stopped in his tracks. Although he believed that Zhuo Qingqing wouldn't tell others about the Jade Stone, it didn't prevent her from hiring a few helpers. In fact, he had been on guard against this matter ever since he came here. He originally thought that Zhuo Qingqing wouldn't do it, but after seeing the young cultivator, he was a little uncertain. Most importantly, he actually couldn't see through this person's background. He also became cautious and didn't step forward. Instead, he cupped his hands in greeting from afar and said tentatively, "Fellow Taoist, you're too polite. May I know what's your relationship with this fellow Taoist Zhuo?" The young cultivator thought for a moment and said with uncertainty, "Debtor." Debtor? Academy Master Lu's mind changed. It seemed that Zhuo Qingqing owed this person something. This matter was actually more troublesome, because usually, friends who seem to be close to you would not necessarily stand up for you in times of danger. However, the debtor was different. If he killed Zhuo Qingqing, then the thing that she owed would definitely be transferred to him. He felt that he couldn't be entangled in this matter, so he decided to use the name of his sect to pressure people. He said in a low voice, "I am Lu Pufeng, an elder of Huanjin Temple. Fellow Taoist, do you know that this fellow Taoist Zhuo behind you has been colluding with evil spirits for a long time? She is no longer a person of Tao. Today I, Lu Pufeng, am using the name of my sect, and I hope that fellow Taoist can give face to Huanjin Temple and not interfere in this matter." Zhuo Qingqing revealed a look of anger and struggled to speak. "Fellow Taoist, don't listen to his nonsense. The reason he is looking for me is because he covets a treasure that I have on me." Academy Master Lu said righteously, "This woman is just quibbling. I did have my eyes on something on her, but that thing is the source of evil. I snatched it because I didn't want it to bring harm to the world." He looked at the young cultivator and said, "We eradicate evil, kill demons, and maintain the order of Tao. Even if we have to give up our bodies, we must do it." He was the Academy Master of Huanjin Temple for many years, so he didn't need to disguise his words. He seemed to be a righteous person, and anyone who heard him would be in awe. The young cultivator's blood seemed to be boiling from his words, and he said, "That's right. It is our duty to maintain the order of Tao." Zhuo Qingqing's body trembled, and her face was pale. Academy Master Lu didn't expect that he would be persuaded so easily. He was secretly happy and nodded, "Fellow Taoist, since you agree with my opinion, I believe you won't stop me from taking that thing from this woman, right?" The young cultivator shook his head. Academy Master Lu asked carefully, "Does fellow Taoist have a different opinion?" The young cultivator pondered, "I think it's better for me to maintain the order of Tao." Chapter 22-21. Master Lu's expression stiffened. He didn't say so much so that someone else could pick the fruit. How could he give up something so close to him? Leave the order of heavenly justice to you? Then what should I do? He pondered for a moment. Perhaps he thought that this person in front of him could still be persuaded, so he continued to use the same tactic as before and said with a stern expression, "This kind of filth can naturally corrode people. For example, fellow Taoist Zhuo, you were originally an outstanding person of my human Tao, but you were also led astray by this thing. How can I just watch as this thing poisons you? I am an elder of Anjin Temple, and I specialize in killing demons and cleaning up filth. I will not pass this responsibility to others. It is better for me to do it myself." The young cultivator was not convinced. If Anjin Temple can do it, why can't I? Master Lu took a breath and tried to be patient. He said, "That's not what I mean. Cultivators of Anjin Temple do this all year round. We are more experienced and can ensure that there will be no accidents." The young cultivator waved his hand and said with a resolute expression, "But how can we concede just because of a trifling obstacle? Justice will not agree. Neither will the proper order. My conscience will not agree." Court Master Lu looked at the young cultivator's expression that said, "You don't need to say anything. Let me do it." He could not help but feel his teeth itch. However, it was not worth it to immediately turn hostile. Zhuo Qingqing struggled to support her upper body and said to the young cultivator, "Fellow Taoist, this person's words are full of slander. I dare to swear that I have never harmed a human path cultivator. But Lu Pufeng says that I have harmed human path cultivators. Dare I ask, does he dare to swear that he did all of his actions out of righteousness and righteousness?" Master Lu said indifferently, "No need to act. Swearing is useful, but there are many ways to break it. Even if you can swear, it cannot prove that you are really innocent. Plus, you are tainted by evil. Even if you are not willing to do something, there will be evil demons who will do it for you. That is why I insist on taking back this item." Zhuo Qingqing glanced at him coldly. She stretched out her hand and took out a jade stone that looked like a baby from the sachet. Holding it in her palm, she said to the young cultivator, "Fellow Taoist, there's no need to argue with him anymore. The so-called filth on me is this jade stone. I'm willing to hand it over to fellow Taoist today." Court Master Lu's eyes suddenly focused on it. He really wanted to snatch it at this moment, but he was not an impulsive person. Not to mention the pressure from the young cultivator, Zhuo Qingqing had taken out this thing too quickly, which made him very suspicious of its authenticity. If it was a fake, then if he tried to snatch it now, he would become a joke. The key was that he would not be able to achieve his goal. However, after taking a few glances, he sneered a few times and said, "When I first saw this thing, it was clearly the size of a palm. Why is it so much smaller today? Could it be that fellow Taoist brought a fake item to fool me?" Zhuo Qingqing said, "This is it, there is no other fake." Back then, when she spat out a rainbow light and gave birth to a baby, the jade stone could not be found. However, later on, they found that the baby had a similar item hanging on its chest. It also had the ability to increase one's cultivation, but the effect was much weaker than the original. The young cultivator revealed a curious expression and took the jade stone in his hand. After taking a few glances, he revealed a trace of surprise and said, "Hiss, this thing." Court Master Lu took 2 steps forward and said, "Fellow Taoist, do you see anything?" Zhuo Qingqing also looked at it nervously. The young cultivator said in a low voice, "This thing is fated with me." Court Master Lu's eyes sharpened and the aura on his body moved like a tide. In his view, the young cultivator's words clearly meant that he wanted to snatch this thing. If he did not make a move now, it would be too late. He took a step forward and at the same time, he stimulated his inner breath. In just a moment, the magic power in his body would surge out. However, at this moment, his vision suddenly blurred and he was surprised to find that he had actually arrived in an empty world. His surroundings were filled with smoke and it was impossible to tell where he was. He tried to take a few steps and suddenly saw a cloud of smoke in front of him. A Taoist was sitting there. The Taoist seemed to have also sensed that someone had arrived and looked up at him. Court Master Lu immediately felt that his body was no longer under his control. He walked over like a puppet and then sat down in front of the Taoist. The Taoist said in a pleasant tone, "Fellow Taoist, have you heard of the spirit of creation?" In the frozen world, Ji Zhuang was silently thinking. After the conversation with Xiang Ju, although he did not agree to the Taoist's request, his heart was already shaken. The reason he was still hesitating was not because he was afraid of attracting the spirit of creation. Since each of them had a clear goal, it was impossible to attract this person. Even if Xiang Ju was a clone of the spirit of creation, it was still impossible. It was just that the person Xiang Ju was talking about was extremely powerful in his memory. If this person really came back, even if he defeated Taoist Shen Yuan, it would just be another person sitting in Bushutian. He was afraid that after spending so much effort, nothing would change. As he was thinking, he suddenly felt a wave of divine intent. With a turn of his mind, he received it and transferred it to an unknown place. He saw a Taoist standing there. He cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist Wei Ming, why have you come?" Ever since the failure of the previous siege against Zhang Yan, Wei Ming rarely walked with them again. He knew that Wei Ming was afraid that the 3 lands of creation under his rule would be taken away by Taoist Shen Yuan. That was why he did this. He understood why. In fact, they did not want to see the 3 lands of creation taken away, so they had been cooperating with the Taoist, pretending to be distant. Wei Ming returned the greeting and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiang Ju came to find me." Ji Zhuang understood and said, "Then he must have told you about it?" Wei Ming nodded slightly. Ji Zhuang said, "Then what do you think, fellow Taoist?" Wei Ming said, "I think I can comply." Ji Zhuang sighed and said, "Looks like fellow Taoist is here to persuade me." Wei Ming shook his head and said, "I'm not here to persuade fellow Taoist. Even if fellow Taoist doesn't agree, I will still help fellow Taoist Xiangjue to bring back that great power. Fellow Taoist can do whatever fellow Taoist wants, just promise not to cause trouble from the side." Ji Zhuang was puzzled and said, "Why are you willing to bring this person back? Forgive me for being blunt, this person is not easy to get along with. Although Taoist Shen Yuan is aggressive, he is not unreasonable. However, this person has never been particular about such things. He only follows his heart and does things according to his nature. It is very difficult to understand him. Wei Ming said, "It is precisely because of this that this person can't be the creation spirit." Ji Zhuang thought carefully and said, "How can fellow Taoist be so sure of this?" Wei Ming said, "Even if the creation spirit wants to devour us, there must be a reason for it to do so. It seems that the person with strong Taoist techniques must be the worst choice because it is extremely difficult to do so. Secondly, the person who is devoured must be cautious and meticulous in his actions. Only then can there be a chance of bringing back the original body. If that person acts as he did before, it will be extremely easy to offend fellow Taoists, which is the most impossible." Ji Zhuang shook his head and said, "I think that following one's heart and nature is the biggest mistake. If this person suddenly thinks of summoning the creation spirit, what will the two of you do?" Wei Ming said, "Fellow Taoist, you worry too much." Ji Zhuang said, "I know that the two of you think that the arrival of this person can balance Taoist Xinyuan, or at least let him bear the pressure, and we can benefit from it. However, things may not develop as you two Taoists wish." At this point, he sighed, "In fact, even if there is a creation spirit among us, because our strength is similar, there is nothing we can do at this moment. On the contrary, if this person is the creation spirit, and if his return Wei is above us, then it will be very inappropriate." Wei Ming said, "I can't convince fellow Taoist, but I will not force fellow Taoist. I just hope that fellow Taoist will think twice before making any plans." Ji Zhuang did not say anything. Wei Ming bowed and left. After sitting for a while, he received Xiangju's divine will. Xiangju smiled and said, "How is it?" Wei Ming said, "Fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang insists on his own opinion. He will not be involved in this matter, but from his attitude, I think he will not obstruct us." Xiangju said, "Oh? I didn't expect fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang to be so stubborn this time." Wei Ming said, "There is no need for him to be involved in this matter, we can do the same." Xiangju said, "As long as fellow Taoist is willing to stand on our side, then so be it if fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang does not obey. When that person returns, he will know that our choice is right." At this time, Zhang Yan was studying the Great Tao in Qinghuan Palace. He suddenly opened his eyes and looked, and saw that there was an additional force in the unseen world. He could see that there was a Vedanta intentionally or unintentionally pushing for more Wei to return, and this time, there seemed to be a clear direction, and it was not as chaotic as before. As for who was doing this, there was no need to guess, it was none other than those few. Originally, he had sensed this kind of thing, but he could not reflect it so clearly. It was just that as he recently studied the Great Tao that was originally lacking due to the spirit of creation, he gained a lot from it, and could look down on his peers. And the actions of those Vedanta who were also involved in this Tao became relatively easy to sense. His eyes flickered slightly, thinking about whether he should stop this matter. In fact, it was really hard to say what the pros and cons of this matter were. If the process of the return of Vedanta sped up, then it could be imagined that the spirit of creation would undoubtedly return faster. Although it was not very likely for the next time, it was hard to say for the next time, because as the number of Wei pestering decreased, there was no doubt that the resistance in front of it would also decrease. His current accumulation of power was far from the end, and he was not ready to fight with this person. It was just that the collision between the Taoist teachings had made a lot of benefits, but the progress had gradually slowed down. He believed that this was because the Yanjiao and one or two sects could only obtain the benefits in front of them. If they wanted to obtain more, they had to find a way to compete with more Taoist teachings. How would these Taoist teachings come about? Naturally, there was a need for more Vedanta to return to create. He changed his mind. This time, it seemed that this generation had already discussed where they were going to use their strength. However, whether they would first find a way to restore one of the Wei completely, or invite another Vedanta that he had never seen to return, this was still uncertain for the time being. But as long as it was not the spirit of creation returning, there would be no problem. Chapter 22-22. When Court Master Lu's magic power rose, Zhuo Qingxing could clearly feel that he was about to snatch it. Her heart suddenly tightened. Could the person beside her really stop Court Master Lu? Having the jade taken away was secondary, but to prevent the secret of this place from being leaked, could she and her child's lives be saved? But in the next moment she saw Court Master Lu standing there in a daze, motionless. His magic power had also weakened. She waited for a while, but when she saw that he did not move, her heart was filled with confusion. She looked at the young cultivator and asked, "Fellow, what's wrong with him? Is it your method?" The young cultivator said in a deep voice, "It's not me who's stopping him, but my Tao." Zhuo Qingxing was stunned. After a dozen breaths, Court Master Lu's aura fluctuated, as if he had suddenly woken up from a deep dream. Then he looked at the jade with a complicated gaze. Zhuo Qingxing became nervous again and said, "Lu Pufeng." Court Master Lu shook his head and sighed. "Fellow Zhuo, don't worry. This thing is useless to me." Just now that he had entered that world and obtained the inheritance of the Tao, he had seen a supreme Tao path. After he understood the reason behind it, he knew that even though his cultivation would be able to improve in a short period of time after he obtained the jade, once he relied on it, then he would fall into a barrier in his heart, and he wouldn't be able to go far on his path towards the Tao. He was originally obsessed with the Tao, so when he saw that this thing could be beneficial to his cultivation, his greed was aroused. But now that he thought about it, how laughable was it? He cupped his hands towards the young cultivator and said sincerely, "Thank you for allowing me to see the Tao and understand the truth. I hope you can forgive me for my previous disrespect." The young cultivator nodded with satisfaction. "Since you understand, then you can leave." Court Master Lu bowed, then turned into a streak of light and left without looking back. The young cultivator looked at his receding figure and sighed in his heart. It seemed that the order of the heavenly justice should be maintained by him. Just now, this person had vowed to compete with him, but now he had taken the initiative to retreat. It seemed that he had realized the gap between them. It seemed that he had to restrain himself as much as possible in the future. Otherwise, if he was not careful, he would not give others a chance, which would not be good. After he was done lamenting, he walked over to Zhuo Qingxing's side and asked, "What are your plans?" Zhuo Qingxing still felt some disbelief when she saw Headmaster Lu leave just like that. Her eyes involuntarily became a little dazed, but she quickly recovered her clarity. She struggled to get up and bowed to the ground. "I don't dare to trouble you again. It's just that if this child of mine were to follow by my side, it would be holding him back. If you don't mind, why don't you allow him to follow you? I'm also willing to hand the jade stone over to you to deal with." The young cultivator said straightforwardly, "Then let's do it this way. This child can be considered to be fated with me, so I will take him away." Zhuo Qingxing was extremely reluctant in her heart and said, "Will I still be able to see him in the future?" The young cultivator said, "Of course you can. If you want to see him, you can come to the Dark Mirror branch of the Teaching Evolution and report my name, Menghu." Zhuo Qingxing felt a wave of joy in her heart. She bowed gratefully and said, "So it's fellow Taoist Meng of the Teaching Evolution. Thank you, fellow Taoist. I will definitely remember fellow Taoist's great kindness in my heart." After Menghu bid farewell to her, he brought the child back to the Mirror Lake branch. After casually tossing the child in the abode, he came over to Zhang Chan and reported what had happened. After listening to him, Zhang Chan glanced elsewhere and said, "I think that child's intelligence is not mature yet. It's not enough to harm him. He needs to be guided later on. Are you able to deal with him?" Menghu said, "Teacher, you've also seen the children I took in earlier. They were all guided onto the right path by me." Zhang Chan snorted and said, "Whether it's the right path or the wrong path, I don't care how you deal with them. As long as these disciples of yours don't cause trouble for the Teaching Evolution and me in the future, it's fine." After reprimanding a few more times, he sent Menghu away. After thinking for a while, he came to the back room of the cave residence. There was a memorial tablet placed here. He went forward and bowed, saying, "This lowly one greets Master." Zhang Yan's Weili was everywhere. At this moment, when he bowed down, the Weili automatically reacted and condensed into form, appearing on the portrait behind the confession table. He looked down and said, "Do you have something to tell me?" Zhang Chan said, "This lowly one was ordered by Master to go down to the lower realm to search for the body of the spirit of creation. After going through a few tests, this lowly one thought that with his temperament, he wouldn't be influenced by external forces." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You're talking about that disciple of yours called Meng Hu, right? He's indeed a meritorious person and can protect himself. This meritorious deed should be credited to you." Zhang Chan said, "This lowly one doesn't dare, but this lowly one has a worry." Zhang Yan said, "Tell me about it." Zhang Chan said, "In order to resist the Luo sect's invasion, Meng Hu once dragged his opponent into the heart realm, causing the Tao of spirit of creation to be inadvertently spread. Although this wasn't his original intention, it still caused this Tao to be leaked. It's really hard for this disciple to speculate whether this is related to it. I'm afraid that it will cause some unexpected disaster, so I came to ask Master for advice." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I know about this. This can't be blamed on him. Even if this Dao is spread to the outside, it's not completely a bad thing. After you go back, there's no need to restrict him. He can do whatever he wants to do. In the future, if those spirits of creation fall into the heavens, he can deal with it." Zhang Chan said, "This lowly one understands." At the headquarters of the Yenshur sect, the stone door that had been sealed for hundreds of years slowly moved open. A ray of clear light spread out from inside and disappeared in a flash. The expressions of the disciples who were guarding the door were shocked. They bowed and said, "Welcome back, sect master." Gao Qingtu slowly walked out of the stone mansion. He looked at the disciples who were kneeling in front of the door and said, "Get up." After the disciples expressed their gratitude, they stood up. Gao Qingtu said in a deep voice, "Pass down the order. Summon the elders of the sect to the hall for a discussion." The disciples agreed and went down to pass down the order. After Gao Gua, Tang Yu, and the other elders of the sect received the news that Gao Qingtu had come out of seclusion, they immediately handed over the matter at hand to those close to them and returned to the headquarters. In just one day, all the elders gathered in the main hall. They observed carefully, but found it difficult to see the depth of Gao Qingtu's qi dynamic. They knew that after this seclusion, the sect master's cultivation must have improved by a level. Gao Qingtu first led the elders to worship the sect master. Then he returned to the main hall and said, "How is the situation in the sect during my seclusion?" Immediately, an elder who was in charge of recording and overseeing internal affairs came up and reported the general situation. Gao Qingtu nodded. He also knew a lot of specific matters. He couldn't say so much in the main hall. He had to ask again later. He sighed and said, "I didn't think that during my seclusion for such a long time, there would be so many things happening in the sect and so many young talents emerging." He waved his hand and brought over the name list of the sect. He picked up the pen on the table and circled a few names. He handed it to the attendant beside him and said, "Summon these people to the headquarters." The attendant responded and left the main hall. Gao Qingtu said in a deep voice, "I came out of seclusion this time. My mana has improved greatly. I also need to make plans for the future of the Yen sect." Everyone's expression became solemn. They all straightened their bodies and revealed expressions of listening attentively. Gao Qingtu said, "In my Bushu heaven, the Kanshi continent is the most prosperous. In the past, the strength of the Yen sect was insufficient, so we didn't make any arrangements on the Kanshi continent. Now, the strength of the Yen sect is much stronger than before. So, I want to transfer the elite disciples of the lower houses of the various branches to establish the sect here." Gao Gua hesitated for a moment. Then, she cupped her hands and said, "Teacher, there are sects like the Luo sect, Xing sect, and the De sect that has never been completely annihilated competing with the Yen sect. Now that we've shifted our focus to the Kanshi continent, isn't it a little inappropriate?" Gao Qingtu said, "I've already seen the submission of the letter. These few sects are only restraining a part of the power. It's impossible for the Yen sect to throw all of its power here. It just so happens to fall on the Kanshi continent. You must know that there are countless treasures on the Kanshi continent. Even if the cultivation of our sect doesn't need to rely on external objects, the elixirs and precious medicines refined from rare and precious items will still help the disciples improve their cultivation. Tang Yu had wanted to settle in the Kunshi continent for a long time. He said in agreement, what the sect master said is correct. There are countless rare and precious items on the Kunshi continent. In the past, the Yen sect had to ask the cultivators of the other sects to get the best materials from here. Not to mention owing favors, the amount is still very little. Instead of that, it's better to establish a sect here. In this way, we can take whatever we want. This will definitely greatly increase the strength of the Yen sect. An elder said with a solemn expression. Elder Tang seems to be looking at this matter too easily. The demons on the Kunshi continent possess remarkable abilities. It's not something an ordinary world can compare to. If the disciples of the Yen sect want to establish a foothold here, they'll have to pay a terrible price. Tang Yu said indifferently, this is a necessary matter. The sacrifices of these disciples will be exchanged for the long-term prosperity of the Yen sect. All the elders should understand the trade-off here. Another elder stroked his beard and said, I heard that the Tao on the Kunshi continent is flourishing and that geniuses are emerging in large numbers. Many sects have established their sects here precisely for the sake of recruiting disciples from here. In the long run, it's even more beneficial to us. Even though there were a few elders present that were opposed to the matter of establishing a sect on the Kunshi continent, the majority of the elders were in favor of this suggestion. So this matter was quickly settled and they immediately dispatched manpower from the various altars. On the other hand, Gao Qingtu still handed over the matters of the sect to Gao Guo to manage while he personally took charge of this matter. His seclusion this time was also to prepare for the future. He could see that within the Yen sect, there were currently a few extremely talented people who had reached the level of mortal metamorphosis, but they similarly stopped there. If they wanted to go further, even if their own potential could be unearthed, it would still be difficult for them to break through that barrier by relying on their own strength, unless they could obtain the legendary Profound Stone. Even though he knew that the chances of obtaining this item were extremely slim, he could always meddle in the matters of the Kunshi continent and the mountain and sea realm in the future. If he was lucky, he might even be able to get what he wanted. About half a month later, after he had roughly sorted out all the matters, he dismissed his attendants and went to the ancestral hall alone. He burned incense and worshipped, and finally knelt before the memorial tablet of the sect ancestor, saying in his heart, Disciple wishes to establish a sect on the Kunshi continent. The affairs of the world are unpredictable, and there may be discord with the various sects in the future. I hope the sect ancestor can protect me. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.